After uncovering his wife's 10-year cheating, husband gets brutal revenge and ghosts her for good. I met Agnes in the 9th grade, started dating her, and we were pretty much an established couple from the 10th grade on. We had no problems all the way through high school, and cliché of all clichés, we exchanged our cleanness the night of the senior prom. After uncovering the realm of closeness, we embraced every opportunity. Marriage discussions had been ongoing since the 11th grade, and we had made the decision to wait until college completion before officially getting married. College brought about a transformation in Aggie. In high school, our peers acknowledged our relationship, ensuring that Aggie was left undisturbed by the guys. However, this dynamic changed when we entered college. Although some familiar faces from high school were present, the majority of students came from different places. In this new environment, the guys no longer saw Aggie as exclusively mine. Instead, they perceived her as a desirable female subject to constant attention. I was aware of the situation, but there wasn't much I could do. With different majors and classes, our interactions were limited to the evenings after classes and after I finished work. The attention had an impact on Aggie, making her more flirty. I observed her walking, smiling, and talking with other guys several times, but being on the other side of the quad, she didn't notice me. Twice, while taking a shortcut through the student union, I spotted Aggie in the cafeteria with a guy and once with two of them. It only dawned on me much later that I never saw her with other girls. It was always with guys. Nevertheless, it didn't worry me. After all, we were a couple in love, planning to get married, so there was nothing for me to fret about. She was an attractive girl, naturally drawing attention from guys, but she was mine, proving it every night when we were together. 4 years later, after graduating, finding jobs in our respective fields, getting married, and starting a life of wedded bliss, I enjoyed almost 6 years of contentment before a sudden revelation shook me awake. While at my desk, Molly from the mailroom placed some files in my basket. As I examined the top one, I wondered why it had been routed to me, given that it concerned an account handled by Wally Bergman, an old classmate from high school and college. Midway through, I discovered a major error, realizing the projections were off by almost $3 million. As I reached for my calculator, Wally rushed into my office, urgently seeking the file for a presentation to Apex. I showed him the error, and he appeared visibly concerned about the mistake. He expressed the urgency of revising it swiftly to avoid any potential consequences. Subsequently, he took the file and left hastily to make the necessary adjustments. It was Thursday, and Aggie always worked late to finalize payroll for the Friday payday. Following my routine, I visited Bud's bar after work for his half-pound ground round and a couple of beers before heading home. Completing my burger and starting my second beer, Wally entered, spotted me, and joined me in my booth. He ordered a beer from Sue and asked her to bring me the bill, mentioning it was a gesture of gratitude for helping him preserve his job earlier that day. I accepted without argument, considering it wasn't a substantial amount. We talked about work, covering various subjects, such as whether we had seen certain individuals or heard about recent events. Then Wally brought up a delicate matter. He expressed his view that I was a nice person and questioned why I tolerated Aggie's behavior. I was confused and told him I didn't understand what he meant. He persisted, asking why I allowed Aggie to behave the way she did. My puzzled response prompted him to realize that I was unaware of something significant. As he attempted to leave, I stopped him and insisted that he stay. I urged him not to leave after dropping such a bombshell. I asked him to sit back down and explain further. Wally complied, expressing his uncertainty and shock that I hadn't been aware of the situation for the past 10 years. When I asked him what he meant, he revealed that Aggie had a questionable reputation. I was too stunned to respond. Wally apologized, regretting that he had brought it up. However, I insisted that he continue and provide more details. He admitted to knowing about Aggie's behavior since high school and confessed his involvement with her. Shocked by this revelation, I insisted that he tell me everything from the beginning without leaving out any details. The unfolding story shocked me, not just the content, but the realization that it had been happening for over 10 years without my knowledge. 2 weeks after senior prom, Wally walked into his cousin George's house, finding George and Aggie together. They both saw him, and since neither objected, he dressed and waited his turn. They took turns until Aggie stopped and said she had to clean up before meeting me after my part-time job at Jessup's Market. Wally and George continued their encounters whenever I was at work. After George got serious with Melody Martin, Aggie was involved with Wally for a while. Then he found her with Mike Bella and Justin Walsh. Wally joined in. The three of them continued until she had to stop for our meeting. Wally shared her with several others, and she had participated in group encounters with more than a half-dozen guys. I recognized that we were friends, but we weren't exactly best friends, you know. Remember the age of 18 when hormones were raging? You and Aggie were somewhat steady, but I didn't believe your relationship was that serious. I mean, if it were, would she be involved with anyone who showed interest? College didn't change that pattern. In the first semester as a freshman, Aggie had classes Monday through Thursday and Tuesday through Friday with no classes on Wednesday. Her last class on weekdays ended at 2 or 1, I can't recall your schedule, but when you finished class, you went to work. When Aggie finished class, she headed to a bedroom somewhere. Wednesday turned into an all-day event. Throughout our school years, while class schedules varied, the constant was Aggie engaging after class until you finished work. I might be making it sound like an everyday occurrence, but it wasn't, 2 or 3 times a week. Although most of us were surprised when you and Aggie got married, assuming you must have known what she had been doing. Yet you married her anyway. Some thought maybe you were into the idea of your woman being with other men. Tyler speculated that perhaps you and Aggie were debauchees, but no one remembered seeing you with another girl. However, Aggie was frequently seen with other guys. I had no clue, not even a hint.
Damn, Rob, I hate to be the one to inform you, but if you never knew.
It stands to reason you probably don't know about her Thursday night date with Bob and Bill Howard. On the Tuesdays you bowl, she sees Mark Willard. I'm not sure who else she sees or when, but it's a sure bet that whenever you're off doing something, so is Aggie. It may not matter much, but I stopped being involved with her when you got married. A single woman is one thing, but messing around with a married woman is a whole different situation. I'm not sure what to say, Wally, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm definitely going to take some action. I finished my beer, stood up to leave, and turned to Wally. Thanks, Wally. Thanks for the burger, the beer, and for helping me gain clarity. As I drove home, as I pondered Wally's revelations, I questioned whether to believe him. On one hand, I thought, no way, Aggie loves me and she wouldn't betray me. On the other hand, why would Wally lie to me? I had to finally admit to myself that he wouldn't. He knew I'd verify what he told me, and if he had lied, how could we continue working together? The answer was, we couldn't, and Wally knew it. Working with him, aware of him and Aggie, would be challenging, but we'd eventually overcome it. I remembered the teenage years, with hormones running high. If some other guy's girl offered back then, and I didn't have Aggie, I might have taken it. The real question now was, what the hell do I do? Rob, I didn't know that Aggie and I were finished. I might have managed a one-night drunken mistake or maybe even a short-term affair if Aggie could convince me it wouldn't happen again. But outright betrayal for 10 years? No way. I was lying in bed, pretending to be asleep, as Aggie returned from handling the payroll. I ignored her touch when she reached out, as she wanted to give me leftovers, but I wasn't interested. Admittedly, I'd been receiving them for years without damage, but I didn't know that then. I do now. Her hand on my body made my skin crawl, and for the first time I didn't get aroused when Aggie touched me. I was already up before Aggie the next morning, with coffee brewing and the morning paper in hand. Aggie asked what happened the previous night, since she came home eager and I was already in bed. Wally remarked that my behavior was unusual. I explained that I felt unwell because something I ate disagreed with me, so I decided to go to bed early. Aggie expressed hope for my recovery and mentioned I'd have to double duty tonight to make up for the M night. Upon arriving at work, I immediately dialed Felix Ma, an old high school friend now practicing corporate law. Though I wasn't quite sure what that entailed, I asked him for recommendations for an assertive divorce lawyer. He replied negatively, indicating that my request meant my hopeful assumption was incorrect. Discovering that I was looking for a divorce lawyer suggested that I had learned the truth about Aggie. He then questioned if I believed we had an open marriage, assuming that was the only way Aggie could engage in such behavior and still remain with me. Surprisingly, Felix, I had no idea about her actions until yesterday, I said. After a brief pause, Felix suggested that I contact Tom Sweet and mention his referral. Accordingly, I followed Felix's advice and called Sweet, informing him about Felix's recommendation. He informed me he could meet later that day if I could be there by 1. I assured him I could, and indeed I did. Sweet informed me that I had various choices, ranging from a friendly separation to a scorched earth policy reminiscent of Attila the Hun. In our state, which was not a no-fault state, infidelity constituted valid grounds for divorce. However, obtaining a divorce based on infidelity required concrete and undeniable evidence. Mere hearsay wouldn't suffice. I inquired about how to gather the necessary evidence, to which Sweet responded by taking a card from his desk and passing it to me. The card belonged to Gaston Marshall, a private investigator whose office was conveniently located across the street. Sweet offered to contact Marshall to check if he could accommodate me promptly. I requested him to proceed, expressing my desire to conclude the process as quickly as possible. I also instructed him to start the divorce paperwork, promising to provide the evidence once I obtained it. Sweet made the call, and within 10 minutes, Gaston Marshall outlined our course of action. Unfortunately, one of the requirements was for me to act completely natural around Aggie, avoiding any suspicion that I was aware of the impending divorce. As unpleasant as it may be, Marshall advised, maintain your routine without changes. If you usually engage in lovemaking activities 3 or 4 times a week, continue to do so, whether you typically initiate or not. Keep it up. Just remember, it's no longer about making love, it's about fulfilling a physical need. Don't do anything that might disrupt her routine. It's crucial for our plan that she remains unaware of any changes in your relationship. I returned to my office, summoned my courage, and called Aggie at work. It was our routine to dine out every Friday night and have breakfast every Sunday morning, so when I reached her on the phone, I suggested trochee for dinner, and she agreed. While I enjoyed my veal marsala and Aggie worked on her rigatoni, sipping white wine, Marshall Investigations employees were discreetly installing wireless cameras and listening devices in our house. Sipping my Merlot, I recalled Marshall's advice. It's natural to want to spot hidden cameras, but resist the urge. If she catches you, our efforts could be wasted. Also, force yourself to act natural in the bedroom, challenging unless you're a born exhibitionist. The system is sound and motion activated. You'll be on camera. Knowing some employees may see you, don't let it inhibit you. Although there's a switch to turn off the system at home, most forget to turn it back on when leaving. My advice? Leave the system alone and pretend you're a confident star at work. After dinner, while making a private video, I suggested drinks and maybe some dancing to Aggie. She declined, insisting we head home for me to make up for letting her down the previous night. On the way home, she slid over, unzipped my pants, and cautioned, "Drive carefully, sweetie. Don't hit anything that might make me bite off your meat." In my mind, what she was doing wasn't unique for me, but something she had done with 100 other men over the last 10 years. Despite my disgust with Aggie, human nature took over. A couple of minutes into the act, my body responded, wanting her to continue and bring me to completion. Soon after, I pulled into our driveway, and Aggie urged me to hurry up to the bedroom. I couldn't adhere to Marshall's advice. There was no way I could act natural, knowing I might be performing for an audience. Trying to appear natural while making love with Aggie was going to be a challenge. So I went to where I was told the switch would be and turned the system off, leaving my cell phone on the car seat. I knew it would remind me to reactivate the system when I saw it upon leaving the house. I don't know if it registered with Aggie, but that night, it wasn't making love, it was just going through the motions. Unfortunately, once wasn't enough, and I had to perform 2 more times before Aggie let me sleep. The next morning, dressed for my run, Aggie reminded me she wouldn't be home when I returned, attributing it to a lengthy hair appointment from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Aggie mentioned gossiping with other regulars and usually going to lunch with them. It could even be the truth, but after what I'd recently found out, I thought she probably met one of her extramarital partners, either before or after getting her hair done. On my way out, I switched the system back on. I doubted anything would happen during my run, but I needed to form the habit of ensuring the system was active when I wasn't home. The switch only deactivated the cameras. The listening devices and phone tap were always on. After my usual 5 miles, returning home, I went down into the basement and opened the cabinet above my workbench. It's where I told Marshall to place the recorders. 2 receivers were inside, one for listening devices and the phone tap, the other a DVD recorder receiving input from the wireless cameras. Confirming my suspicions, I heard a recorded conversation. "Hello, good morning. Are we still on for today?" "You bet." "The wife took the kids to the zoo, so we have until 6 tonight. You know I can't stay that long. I need to be home by 2. Any later, and it might get Rob to wondering. He's already questioned the fact that I don't get home until 2. Then skip the hair job and get over here so we can make it happen." "Yeah, sure. Then what do I tell Rob when he asks why I've been gone so long and my hair hasn't been done? I want more time with you too, baby. But we have to settle for what we can get." I recognized the man's voice. It was my cousin Lou. I was furious. When I went back upstairs, wondering how many other relatives she had been involved with, I managed to control my anger by the time Aggie returned from her hair appointment an hour later. I faked a fall down the basement stairs, telling Aggie I'd hurt my back, must have pulled a muscle or something. This conveniently excused me from making love with her for the next couple of days at least. On Monday, I phoned Aggie at work and informed her that I would be leaving town on Tuesday, returning by Friday, to take her out to dinner. Although there was no actual trip planned, I didn't view it as 3 wasted days. On average, I traveled once a month, and Aggie was consistently home during my nightly check and phone call. Since my calls occurred at irregular times, ranging from 7 to 10 p.m., I doubted she waited for them before going out. If she were cheating as I'd been led to believe, she might be doing it on our bed while I spoke to her. That was my hope, if she was, and the cameras captured it, I'd have the irrefutable proof my attorney needed for the divorce action. That evening, Aggie desired closeness, stating, "I need something to hold me for the 3 nights you will be gone." Yeah, right, I thought. Fortunately, my back was still hurting, so I had to decline. On Tuesday morning, Aggie bid me farewell with a kiss, and with suitcase in hand, I left for my supposed business trip. Working almost a full day before leaving at 3, I drove to our neighborhood, parked a block from the house, and using my laptop, entered a code Marshall had given me to activate the software he loaded onto my computer. A few keystrokes, and I was listening to the phone line. Recorder. "Hello, hey handsome honk, it's me. What's up? Hubby just left on a 3-day trip. You ready to spend 3 fun-filled nights with me? Does a duck walk barefoot on the beach? I'll take that as a yes. I leave it to you to call Tony. I've got to get out of here and get to work. I'll be home by 6. See you then." After shutting down the computer, I called Tom Sweet and instructed him to have the papers ready for service by Thursday, detailing how I wanted it done. He informed me that my preferred method would cost more than the standard service fee, to which I replied that I didn't care. Leaving the neighborhood, I drove to the other side of town and checked into a motel with a restaurant and a bar next door, settling in for a 3-day stay. I enjoyed the bar, my kind of place, bringing a big smile to my face each time I visited it. Apologies to Toby Keith. It was a country western bar with a jukebox loaded with good tunes for dancing. Every night I saw 3 or 4 unattached ladies who couldn't bear to see a man sitting alone while there was music to dance to. During my first visit, while sitting at the bar nursing a long neck, a great-looking redhead approached and said, "Come on, sugar, they're playing our song." She took my hand, pulled me off the bar stool, and led me onto the dance floor. As we walked, she clarified, "Don't get the wrong idea, sugar. I'm not tallying, I just love to dance, and you were there." Her name was Rhonda, and after the dance, she invited me to join her and her 2 friends, Laura and Shelby, at their table. I spent until 10:30 taking turns dancing with them, then informed them I had to call it a night. "Maybe we will see you again," Rhonda said. "We're in here 2 or 3 nights a week." "I'm just next door in the motel, so it's likely that I will be in here the next 2 nights," I replied. I went to bed feeling positive for the first time since my conversation with Wally. The following afternoon at 3:00, I parked a block away from the house and reviewed the footage captured by the wireless cameras the previous night. The 2 men who joined Aggie in the bedroom were notably younger, at least 6 years her junior, and I wondered if Aggie was seeking youthful exuberance. The content was unremarkable, involving straightforward lovemaking activities. While the visual of Aggie with 2 men didn't particularly interest me, I was intrigued by the audio. I was surprised by what I heard, or rather, what I didn't hear. I expected Aggie to ridicule my lovemaking skills, but she never did. Wednesday was uneventful, with my presence only acknowledged when one of the men expressed a wish for more frequent meetings. Aggie clarified that I had priority for her time. However, I overheard Aggie telling them to leave the house by 6 in the morning on both Wednesday and Thursday. She emphasized the importance of avoiding being seen by the neighbors, as none of them were early risers. They left precisely at 6, and I assumed the same would occur on Friday. I called my attorney and had him change the serving of the papers to Friday at 5:45. Friday morning, I parked just down the street from the house at 5:55. When the front door opened, the 2 men came out. They turned to say goodbye to Aggie, who was standing just inside the door, and that is when they saw the man standing just off to the side. He stepped in front of the open door, served Aggie, and then turned and walked away, leaving Aggie and her 2 companions looking at his back. I pulled up in front of the house, honked the horn to make sure I had Aggie's attention, and then I waved bye-bye and drove off. The papers served on Aggie were a letter from me to her. Basically, it said that I never wanted to speak to her again unless in the presence of our attorneys. I didn't want to know why. I didn't want to hear that she loved only me, and it was just meaningless closeness with the others. I didn't want to hear that it wasn't what I thought it was, and I didn't want to hear that we could get by it because of our love for each other. I did not want to hear any of the excuses cheaters come up with when caught. Of course, Aggie paid no attention to the letter, and 15 minutes after I had pulled away from the house, my cell rang. It was Aggie. I let it go to voicemail, along with the next 7 calls from her. When I got to work, I told my secretary that I had left Aggie and not to put through any calls from her. I had another thought as I was opening my office door and turned back to her. Another thing, Martha, if she shows up here, please tell her that I'm not here. Tell her I've gone to meet with a customer. Martha stuck her head in the door 5 minutes later. I talked to Iris on the front desk. If your wife shows up, she'll call me and stall her to give you time to get out the side door. You can go to the cafe and have coffee until she leaves. I thanked her, and as she went back to her desk, I thought, and not for the first time, that a good secretary is a priceless thing to have. Aggie called me 17 times that day, and I ignored all the calls. At lunchtime, I phoned my dad and brother, updating them on the situation. I instructed Dad to inform Mom and asked her not to persuade me to reconcile with Aggie. He mentioned it would be challenging since Mom viewed Aggie as the daughter she never had. By the day's end, I still had some pending work. Since there was no rush to go home, I opted to stay and finish it. By 5, Martha informed me before leaving, "By the way, your wife called 5 times before noon, and each time I told her I had instructions not to put her through to you. I think she finally got the message since she hasn't called since." I finished around 7. Upon reaching the lobby, Iris was gone. Hank, our night watchman, saw me and commented, "Hot time on the town tonight with the missus?" "Why would?" "You think that?" I asked. "She's out there waiting on you." I clarified, "We're getting a divorce, Hank, and she wants to talk and I don't." I instructed him not to open the door if she knocked, and if she used the intercom, to say he was alone in the building. I add that my car was in the lot due to a breakdown and a tow truck would arrive in the morning. Hank assured me he could handle it, expressing sympathy for the situation and sharing that he had been through 2 divorces. Exiting through the back door, I circled the block, crossed the street, and walked down the alley to Dave's diner. Entering and taking a seat, I positioned myself to observe Aggie waiting by my car. I ordered the special and kept an eye on her while eating. Halfway through dessert, she approached the building and pressed the call button on the intercom. Apparently, Hank conveyed my message as she returned to her car and left. After finishing dessert and having one more cup of coffee, I departed. I briefly stopped in the bar for a couple of beers. Despite a few ladies there alone, hoping for a dance partner, I had my 2 beers and left. Saturday morning proved busy as I attended to tasks I should have completed before serving Aggie. I just hoped I wasn't too late and she hadn't taken action on what I should have done. I went to the bank and emptied all the accounts, retrieved my personal papers and certificates of deposit from the safe deposit box, leaving Aggie's belongings untouched. I removed my wedding ring, placing it in the box for her discovery. Afterward, I had breakfast at the Waffle House. Using my cell phone to handle the credit cards, I canceled both joint cards, leaving me with a Visa and an American Express solely in my name. Aggie also had 2 cards in her name only, thus I ensured she couldn't run up joint cards with cash advances. After breakfast, I returned to the motel, parked my car, and called a cab to take me to the nearest Avis rental place. Renting the cheapest car available, I returned to the motel. I spent the afternoon lounging by the motel pool and reading a book. Just before dinner, I switched on my cell phone, finding 9 messages from Aggie. I cleared them and then turned the phone back off. For dinner, I had a light meal and then headed to the bar, which had a live band on Friday and Saturday, attracting a large crowd. Finding a seat at the bar, I ordered a beer. As I downed about half of it, I felt a tug on my shirt. Turning, I saw Rhonda. "Hey, cowboy, why are you sitting here when there's a seat at our table for you? To be honest, if I had seen you, I wouldn't have intruded on you. It would have seemed like I was taking things for granted." "Nonsense, come on." I got up and followed her to her table, where Laura and Shelby were also present. I sat down, greeted the girls, and then commented, "There seems to be something wrong with this picture. 3 beautiful women sitting alone, and you aren't swamped with guys?" "We get a lot of attention, but it is usually from idiots," Rhonda explained. "They see us here, notice the wedding rings, and assume we're here to cheat. We're just here to dance, and only a couple of guys understand that and accept it. The rest think they are God's gift to women, and we have to fend them off. After the other night, we know that you are one of the good guys, and you have an open invitation to join us whenever you come in, and we are here. It isn't any of my business, and I know that, so feel free to tell me that. But I have to ask, why are 3 gorgeous married women spending time in a place like this without your husbands? It is a legitimate question," Rhonda said. "Laura's husband is in the Army Reserve, and his unit was sent to Afghanistan. She was going nuts cooped up in her house alone, so we decided to get her out. Shelby's husband works afternoons, and my hubby is a long-haul trucker who is off and away. So, the 3 of us banded together to keep each other company. We love to dance, and here we are." "What's your story? I noticed you had a ring on last time we saw you, and now it's gone." "I handed my wife divorce papers yesterday morning and left the ring where she'd find it." "Does that mean you're free to pursue?"
Not at all.
The grounds were infidelity, and I won't give her anything she could use against me in a countersuit. Laura remarked, "Great," she added, "we have a reliable dancing partner." The rest of the evening until closing I danced with the three of them, occasionally sharing them with other guys. They agreed to meet on Sunday. I spent a quiet day by the pool with a book, and Monday I drove the rental car to work. I hoped Aggie wouldn't see my car, assuming I was out of town again, and would stay away. The week passed with 6 to 10 calls daily from Aggie, which I never answered. More than once she called from unfamiliar numbers, but upon hearing her voice, I hung up. Each night after dinner, I stopped by the bar for a beer or two. Rhonda, Laura, and Shelby were there on Wednesday and Friday, so I joined them, dancing until 10 on Wednesday and until closing on Friday. I figured by Saturday, Aggie would realize I wasn't going to talk to her, so I turned in my rental and drove my car to work on Monday. A mistake. Monday, she was parked next to my car when I left the building. Spotting me, she got out and stood by my car's driver's side door. She mentioned that we needed to talk, but I didn't respond. As I approached the car, she moved to block the door, insisting that I let her explain. I pushed her aside, causing her to stumble but quickly regain her balance. I rolled down the window and informed her that she needed to read the letter accompanying the divorce papers. I asserted that I wouldn't engage in any conversation without my attorney present, and that any discussion would strictly concern the divorce. Aggie expressed her unwillingness to divorce and her continued love for me. I reiterated that our relationship was over and that she needed to accept it because I wouldn't change my mind. After rolling up the window, I drove away, leaving her behind. Aggie's refusal to accept my decision became apparent when I left work on Tuesday. 2 men approached my car and grabbed my arms. I recognized them as the individuals who had been with Aggie in our bedroom. One of them warned me not to resist, stating that Aggie wanted to talk, and since I was being difficult, they would take me to her by any means necessary. Though only a few years older, they must have thought I was soft due to my suit and briefcase. I figured I could handle them. They wouldn't expect an old guy to resist, so I could catch them off guard. Either way, the commotion would draw attention and their kidnapping plan would fail. But then I pondered, do I truly desire this? If Aggie was willing to go to such lengths just to reach me, what might she attempt next if I sent these two back to her battered and bruised? They nudged me into my car and I sat between them, a briefcase on my lap as they drove to the house. They escorted me inside, and Aggie instructed them to seat me in a chair and ensure I remained there. She turned to me and announced that we wouldn't be getting a divorce. As I attempted to rise from the chair, the 2 men pushed me back down and restrained me. One of them warned me to stay still. Aggie declared that we would remain married, but that there would be changes in our lifestyle due to her medical issue, which I had discovered. She expressed regret that I had found out about it, but insisted that I had to accept it now that I knew. She then confessed her love for me, asserting that she wouldn't let me go. She revealed that her medical issue was nymphomania, which she claimed she had suffered from since high school. Aggie attributed the onset of her condition to when I took her purity. I dismissed her statement, suggesting that there were medications available to address her condition. She acknowledged that such medications existed, but explained that she had tried them all and found them ineffective, as they made her feel sluggish and dull, likening the experience to being a zombie. Despite this, she admitted that she enjoyed being a nymphomaniac and emphasized her love for closeness, asserting that she hardly ever left me alone. She argued that her actions didn't damage me and that she spoiled me. Aggie reasoned that since I couldn't maintain arousal constantly, she needed to seek it elsewhere and assured me that she always returned to me because she loved me. She outlined her terms, explaining that she had drafted a postnuptial agreement, allowing her to have as many lovers as necessary for her mental well-being. She proposed that I agree to leave the marriage with nothing if I later found the conditions unacceptable. In return, she asked what she would receive besides having a promiscuous wife. I responded by assuring her that she would continue to have the same loving wife she had been for the past 6 years. I reminded her that she had considered those years perfect, despite my actions, which were now causing an issue. I suggested that the only change was that my ego was now involved, as someone else was involved in something I had previously considered mine alone. I urged her to accept that our life would continue as it had for the last 6 years. Aggie emphasized that my inability to meet her physical needs didn't mean I wasn't man enough for her. She praised me as a fantastic lover who always left her completely satisfied. However, she acknowledged that I couldn't satisfy her as often as she needed. I addressed her by her full name, aware of her aversion to it, reluctantly agreeing to sign the agreement with a few amendments. I voiced my concerns about our lack of closeness and expressed my need for her presence in our bed. Despite my plea and reassurance of my love for her, she seemed unwavering in her stance. With a heavy heart, I accepted her offer to make the necessary changes, hoping it might salvage some of our crumbling relationship. As I attempted to rise from my chair, the two men accompanying her obstructed my path, leaving me feeling trapped and powerless. When I mentioned needing to use the bathroom, one of them callously suggested I relieve myself where I sat, citing Aggie's directive to keep me seated until further notice. Aggie returned after 5 minutes, read the document aloud, and I asked where to sign. She offered a pen, but I mentioned her associates preventing me from standing and instructed them to step aside. Rising, I approached her, placed my briefcase on the table, and took the pen. However, I decided to review it myself to ensure its contents matched her description. After reading it, I chuckled, tore it up, and tossed it back at her. I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the door. Aggie yelled for the two men to stop me, and they pursued. As they neared, I swiftly turned toward them with my briefcase, targeting the first guy's head. It was a solid hit, sending him down. The second guy was taken off guard, and I punched him in the mouth, causing him to stagger backward. Then I delivered a forceful kick to his groin and he collapsed. Understanding the need to keep them subdued in a 2-against-1 scenario, I continued to strike both of them. I alternated between kicking them in sensitive areas and striking their ribs and heads until Aggie screamed for me to stop or she'd shoot. Glancing at her, I noticed she was aiming a weapon at me. Defiantly, I challenged her to shoot. I retrieved my cell phone, dialed emergency, provided my name and address, and informed the operator of my wife's armed threat. The operator advised me to remain calm and not provoke her, assuring help was on the way. After ending the call, I sarcastically thanked Agnes, suggesting her incarceration would expedite our divorce. She criticized my actions as foolish. Agnes warned me that when the police arrived, I would be the one facing arrest. She accused me of entering and attacking her friends out of jealousy, stating that it would be my word against theirs and that they were fully clothed. I mocked her response, questioning her love for me. She assured me not to worry. I countered by stating that I would bail out and that Barry and Tony wouldn't press charges. I reminded Agnes that Hank and Joyce had witnessed the two individuals picking me up from work and escorting me inside. I accused her of having me brought there against my will and hindering me when I tried to leave, despite her companion's failure. Then, she pulled a weapon on me. I explained that although I might spend a night in jail, when my witnesses testified, she would be the one behind bars, and I wouldn't be posting her bail. I advised her that, considering the situation, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, weapon threats, and likely other charges, her best course of action would be to stay silent. Aggie ignored my advice, and along with her associates, fabricated their stories. Consequently, I was taken into custody. The next morning I called Tom Sweet, briefed him on the situation, and instructed him to collaborate with Gaston Marshall, obtain the evidence, and take appropriate action. Aggie realized she couldn't bail me out until I appeared before a judge, which wouldn't occur until Monday. Tom had a friend who worked as an assistant district attorney. He showed him the tapes of what happened at the house, which depicted Barry and Tony restraining me while Aggie aimed a weapon at me. The ADA overheard Aggie admitting she planned to lie and have her two accomplices do the same. When Aggie showed up at the courthouse for my bail hearing on Monday morning, she got arrested. Warrants were issued for Barry and Tony, and they were behind bars by nightfall. I refused to post bail for Aggie, and her parents couldn't come up with the money either. Aggie obtained a lawyer who contacted me and suggested a bail bondsman wanted me to use the house as collateral for her bond. I dismissed the suggestion and hung up. I checked out of the motel and moved back home, then had all the locks changed. Since Aggie had threatened me with the weapon, Tom managed to get a restraining order against her in case she somehow got out of jail. She couldn't come within 1,000 feet of me without facing arrest and being sent back to jail. As tempting as it might have been to reconcile with Aggie, it wasn't worth risking serious jail time. Both Barry and Tony flipped on Aggie and took plea deals. Aggie claimed she never intended to shoot me, she was just trying to stop me from hurting Barry or Tony so badly that I'd end up in jail. The jury watched the tape and, based on Aggie's expressions of love for me, believed she was probably telling the truth about trying to prevent me from damaging Barry or Tony. They acquitted her of the felony menacing charge but found her guilty of unlawful restraint and filing a false police report, along with a few minor charges. The judge sentenced her to 9 months in county jail and 1,000 hours of community service upon release. While she was in jail, the divorce proceedings wrapped up smoothly. Aside from losing Aggie, I only forfeited 20% of the equity in the house. I transferred the money to her bank account and headed to the bar next to the motel where I'd been staying. Luck was on my side. Rhonda and Shelby were there, so I invited them to celebrate my newfound freedom with me. Laura wasn't around because her husband had returned from deployment and they were busy catching up. "Why celebrate with us?" Rhonda asked. Well, I'm taking a wild guess here. I noticed Laura's wedding ring, and Shelby's too. But you, Rhonda, aren't wearing a ring, and I don't see any signs you ever wore one. So I'm guessing there's no long-haul trucker in your life. Plus, I've always had a thing for gorgeous redheads. Shelby chuckled and teased, "Girl, you're busted," as I pulled Rhonda onto the dance floor.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Ben smiled as he spotted Alistair walking into the bar, heading toward their usual corner. It had been a few weeks since they'd been able to catch up, and Ben had been hoping his friend would stop by. Despite it being early and the bar still relatively empty, he seemed to have gotten lucky. Alistair had been preoccupied with something in his life and had been difficult to reach. Ben had tried calling, emailing, even stopping by Alistair's home and office, but there had been no response. He'd grown genuinely concerned, hoping whatever had been troubling Alistair was finally behind him. But as Alistair neared, Ben could see the storm in his eyes. The angry expression on his face told Ben that whatever was going on, it wasn't close to being resolved. This could be a long night. Ben stood up, eager to greet his friend, but before he could react, a sudden punch to his jaw sent him crashing to the ground. The blow was so fierce that Ben's head slammed into a nearby table as he fell. "Wah," Ben mumbled. His words slurred as he spit out a bloody tooth, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Alistair towered over him, fists clenched, ready to strike again. "You bastard. You knew all along, didn't you? You and your wife have been making a joke out of me, haven't you? I bet you both got a good laugh at how much of a fool I've been." Dazed from the blow, Ben felt his jaw swelling rapidly, making it hard to focus. His head was spinning, and nothing Alistair said made any sense. All Ben could manage in his confused state was a weak, "Huh?" A flurry of kicks slammed into Ben's ribs and legs as Alistair continued to shout, his voice full of rage. "I'm sure it was hilarious, huh? You and her, laughing at me behind my back. All those times you hung out with me, just so she could screw around. Hey, buddy, let's go to my father-in-law's cabin for the weekend. Hey, buddy, Kathy got us tickets to that concert you've been dying to see, but it's 3 hours away, so we'll need to stay overnight. Any excuse to get me out of the house so she could screw that scumbag. I should have seen it coming, but I never thought you'd do this to me. I don't know what I did to make you hate me this much. But not only are you a shitty person, you're a shitty friend." The patrons in the bar had finally reacted, pulling Alistair off Ben, but not before the damage had been done. Ben, dazed and confused from the brutal blows, struggled to comprehend his friend's words, trying to piece together a reality that felt completely foreign. The bartender had already called the cops, and a cruiser arrived just in time to prevent any more violence. The ambulance took much longer to arrive, but by the time Alistair was cuffed and placed in the back of the patrol car, Ben had managed to struggle to his feet, with the help of some concerned strangers. The ambulance crew quickly assessed him, placing him on a gurney and strapping him down tightly for transport to the emergency room. Ben was barely conscious by then, his head spinning, and he passed out to the sound of the siren as the ambulance pulled away from the parking lot. To Ben, it felt like a short nap, a fleeting moment of confusion he hoped was just a bad dream. But when he slowly began to regain consciousness, the familiar hum of hospital machines and the sterile setting around him made it clear. This wasn't a dream. He was in a hospital room, surrounded by outdated medical equipment and a TV that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. Before Ben could gather his bearings, his wife Kathy walked in, her face streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry, baby," she said, her voice breaking as she rushed to his side. "I wanted to be here when you woke up, but I had to step out to call your parents and let them know you're okay. How are you feeling?" Ben slowly sat up in the bed, trying to piece together what had happened. The medicine and rest had reduced the swelling in his face enough that his words were clearer now. Kathy sat down beside him, taking his hand gently, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what happened," Ben said, his voice still a bit groggy. "I'd never seen him like that before. He said something about Amanda cheating on him, and that we were helping her, that we caused it." His freakout made no sense. Kathy's tears continued to fall silently as Ben spoke, his mind still struggling to make sense of Alistair's words. "I may not have heard it correctly, but he seemed to think that he and I only did those trips so Amanda could cheat on him. That's insane. Why would he think something like that?" There was a pause in the conversation as Ben let out a deep breath. He looked over at Kathy, her head bowed as she whispered, "I'm sorry." "I don't know what you're sorry for," Ben replied, his voice rising slightly. "He's the one who hit me and came up with that crazy idea that we were helping her cheat. It sounds so dumb. Why would he think we'd do something like that? What kind of awful people would do that to someone they care about?" Ben paused, his mind still spinning. Kathy raised her head, but something in her demeanor didn't sit right with him. The way she wasn't offering her usual strong opinions or support, it felt off. Maybe he was still disoriented from the blow to the head, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with how she was reacting. She seemed distant, almost too quiet, in a way that Ben couldn't quite place. Kathy was clearly upset, but it felt like there was something more beneath the surface. Normally, she would have been quick to voice her thoughts, especially in a situation like this, where a close friend was involved. Yet, she seemed almost too reserved, too apologetic, for someone who should have been just as shocked by the outburst as he was. It crossed his mind that she might still be in shock from the whole incident, but a nagging sense of suspicion lingered in the air. Ben was preparing to ask Kathy what was going on when the doctor walked in with the prognosis. "Your jaw's not broken or dislocated, just bruised," he said, checking the notes on his clipboard. "As long as you don't have a headache, you should be able to leave tonight." Ben still had a dull headache from the blow, but with Kathy acting strange, he didn't want to stay in the hospital any longer. He lied to the doctor, forcing a smile and telling him he felt great so they could head home. The nurses were thorough with the paperwork, and Ben didn't get a chance to speak with Kathy privately before they left, but he hoped that once they were home, she'd feel more at ease and would finally open up to him. The drive home was eerily silent. Kathy didn't turn on the radio, and the quiet was almost suffocating. Ben kept glancing at her, but she didn't seem to notice. He wanted to ask her what was going on, but by the time they arrived home, exhaustion hit him hard, and he just wanted to sleep. He quickly changed out of his hospital gown and collapsed into bed, his body sore from the beating, and fell asleep within minutes. Kathy curled up beside him, holding him tightly as if she were afraid of losing him, but Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, after a quick shower, Ben went downstairs to join Kathy in the kitchen. His head still ached, and his body was sore, but at least his mind was clearer. Kathy was sitting at the table, sipping her coffee, but she had a distant look in her eyes, clearly lost in thought. Ben grabbed his own cup, and for a moment, they just sat there in silence. Finally, Kathy looked up, as if she hadn't realized he was there. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, her voice quiet but with a hint of concern. "All right," Ben replied, rubbing his temples. "I've got a bit of a headache and I'm sore all over. I think with a day of relaxing, I'll be fine. But I still can't figure out what caused Alistair to go nuts like that or say the things he did." He paused, watching her carefully as he took a sip of his coffee. "Did she say anything to you? Have you talked to her since yesterday to figure out what happened to him?" Kathy took a moment before answering, as if carefully choosing her words. "I did talk to her for a bit yesterday. She was as shocked as I was that he would do something like that to you." Ben studied Kathy closely as she spoke, sensing the carefully measured tone of her words. But there was something more, an underlying sorrow that didn't sit right with him. Her usual spark was absent, replaced by a reserved demeanor that was so unlike her. It struck him that maybe the assault had shaken her more than he'd realized, and she was struggling with it in her own way. Reaching across the table, Ben gently took her hands in his, offering a reassuring smile. "It's okay, honey. I'm fine. I'll heal." His words were met with a soft, unexpected flood of tears as Kathy wrapped her arms around him. Her genuine sorrow soaked through his shirt as they held each other tightly, exchanging whispered words of comfort and "I love yous." For a moment, Ben let himself sink into the solace of their embrace, though something still gnawed at him beneath the surface. The rest of the day passed quietly as they both called out of work, choosing to stay home and try to recover. Yet, Ben couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more was at play here, something beyond just the physical pain from the attack. Alistair's sudden outburst and accusations, Kathy's strange distance, and the strange silence in their home all seemed off. Nothing added up, and Ben felt an urge to understand it, even if it meant confronting the difficult truths. As they stayed in separate parts of the house, Ben sat outside in the backyard, watching the wind rustle the trees and grasses, his mind turning over the events of the past day. He replayed the moment of Alistair's violent outburst in his head, trying to piece together what could have triggered it. He had known Alistair for years, and the anger that had exploded out of him seemed so unlike his friend. Alistair was never a man to fly off the handle without a reason, and yet here they were. Ben also kept returning to Kathy's words. She had never outright denied that Amanda had cheated, only expressed shock and sympathy for what had happened to him. It struck Ben as odd that she hadn't spoken more definitively about the situation. Was there something she wasn't saying? Something she was afraid to admit? The more Ben thought about it, The clearer it became that he needed to hear Alistair's side of the story directly. Confronting him again was risky, especially after the violent way their last interaction had ended, but Ben felt that it might be the only way to understand what had happened and why. He had to understand what had caused Alistair to lash out and blame him and Kathy for something that made no sense to him. It was the only way to make sense of this mess. Once he understood Alistair's perspective, Ben could sit down with Kathy to talk through their roles in all of this. He needed to know how they had become tangled in this web of accusations. What had caused Alistair to think they were disloyal? What was really going on with Kathy? Ben was determined to get to the bottom of it, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. In the early afternoon, Kathy mentioned to Ben that she needed to stop by her office briefly to pick up her laptop, as she would be home with him for the rest of the week and didn't want to fall behind on her work. After she left, Ben decided to take a chance and visit Alistair. He tried calling Alistair on his way to his house, but the phone kept ringing. Hoping that Alistair had been released from jail by now, Ben took an Uber to his place. If luck was on his side, maybe Alistair would be there, and they could finally figure out what had happened and hopefully repair things. However, when the Uber dropped Ben off in front of Alistair's house, his stomach sank as he noticed Kathy's car in the driveway. Instead of ringing the doorbell, Ben quietly walked around the house to the back gate, moving closer to an open window next to the kitchen. He froze when he heard Kathy talking to Ben's wife. Kathy wasn't holding back. Her voice was loud and filled with anger. What the hell happened? How did Alistair figure out what was going on? Ben's wife asked. Alistair overheard me talking about setting up a date and you covering for me. I wasn't paying attention to where I was, and he heard a conversation that he definitely shouldn't have, Kathy replied, frustration clear in her voice. Okay, but how does that explain why he attacked Ben? Ben's wife pressed. Alistair must have thought that Ben knew what was going on when he heard me say you would cover for me, and that Ben would keep him distracted while I went out. He took it as Ben being involved. I didn't find out until after the attack that he knew. He's furious. He even used his phone call from jail to tell me how much he hates me, saying he'd rather stay in jail than come back to live with me. He said every cruel thing he could think of. Kathy wanted to feel sorry for her friend, but she couldn't ignore that it was her own actions that had caused all of this. Helping someone cheat had already put her marriage at risk, and things were about to get much worse once Ben found out. Kathy knew what she had done was wrong, but she had been close to her friend and hoped that Alistair's wife would only have a brief fling and then return to being the wife Alistair wanted. Instead, Kathy had helped escalate the situation, and now she was facing the fallout of enabling destructive behavior, her own marriage on the verge of falling apart because of someone else's inability to stay faithful. I know you've got your own problems, but so do I. Once Ben figures out what happened, my marriage is going to be in serious trouble. Why would your marriage be in trouble? You didn't cheat, and they gotta have fun. He knows you'd never betray him. I'll tell him that you never did, Kathy's friend argued. Ben couldn't see it, but the tone of Kathy's voice told him everything. He could hear her closing her eyes and rubbing her forehead in frustration. You really don't get it, do you? She replied, her voice thick with exasperation. I lied to him. I helped you destroy his best friend. I helped cause his best friend to assault him. Do you really think he'll believe a single word I say now? And as for you helping me, you're the one he's going to hate the most. Do you really think he's going to listen to anything you say after all the lies you've told? But I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't cheat. You did. He has to understand that, her friend insisted. Kathy sighed deeply, her frustration palpable. It won't matter. I don't know how to fix this. And by the time Ben finds out, my marriage is probably just as over as yours is. I can't believe I was so stupid to help you. You need to understand, if I lose him, I'm done with you. I can't even look at you anymore. But you've always been a loving wife. He must know how much you love him, came the feeble reply. Yeah, that's me. A loving wife who helped her friend destroy her own marriage and caused her husband to get his ass kicked by his best friend, Kathy snapped. You really don't understand, do you? Do you think he's ever going to trust me again? Best case scenario, it would take years for him to trust me if ever. Ben had heard enough. He quietly backed away from the window and made his way back to the street. His stoic demeanor kept him calm, and his focus shifted toward figuring out the next steps. As he waited for the Uber to arrive, the weight of the situation settled in. He needed to start making things right, but first, he had to get all the facts. It was time to visit a friend. The desk sergeant and detectives were clearly baffled, but after years of dealing with the unpredictable nature of police work, they merely shrugged when Ben announced he was paying for Alistair's bail. They exchanged smirks as Alistair's confusion turned to surprise upon realizing Ben was the one who had gotten him out, and they couldn't help but laugh when Ben told Alistair to keep quiet until he was told otherwise. Still puzzled, Alistair followed Ben out to the Uber and got in without a word. Once in the car, Ben gave the driver the address, and they rode in silence until they arrived at the bar, the scene of the chaos. The same bartender was working, and his anxious expression revealed his concern that another outburst might occur. Ben quickly put him at ease by asking for a bottle of Glenmorangie Signet, 2 glasses, and for them to be left alone while he and Alistair took a booth in the corner. Ben poured generous amounts of whiskey into both glasses, sliding one toward Alistair. They clinked their glasses together with a silent, bitter toast before downing the drinks. Ben watched his friend carefully, then spoke. "I had no idea about the setup. I just wanted to hang out and have a good time with you. They used our friendship against you. They knew I wouldn't go along with their plan. So they kept me out of the loop and ran their bullshit behind my back." Alistair studied Ben for a moment. The two had been close for so long that Alistair could always tell when Ben was being sincere, and it was clear now that he was. With the initial anger fading and the time in jail giving him a moment to cool off, Alistair was starting to think more clearly, or at least more rationally about what Ben had told him. "You know," Alistair muttered, his voice thick with bitterness, "she tore my heart out, and your wife helped her do it. I gave everything I had to our marriage, and it was all for nothing because she'd rather go out and get some other guy's Johnny than stay with me." Ben refilled their glasses, his gaze never leaving Alistair as his friend continued to vent his anger and frustration. The whiskey helped loosen the tension between them, and as Alistair's verbal barrage slowed, Ben sat back and listened quietly. When the storm of emotions finally started to subside, Alistair took a deep breath and turned toward Ben, his expression remorseful. "I probably should have talked to you first," Alistair admitted, his voice softer now, "but I couldn't help it. When I found out my marriage and my friendship with you were both over, I just lost control. As much as her being a 304 killed me, the thought of you backstabbing me hurt worse. The cheating is bad enough, but thinking you were laughing at me while she was doing it was unbearable." "I'm sorry," Ben grinned, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "That's okay. I probably deserved it for banging your sister during Christmas break junior year. But how did you find out she was cheating?" Alistair shook his head with a rueful smile. "It was the dumbest thing, man. I had a feeling something was off with my marriage, so I started pulling back from everyone. I came to the conclusion that she must be cheating, so I was about to hire a PI. But while I was looking up investigators at work, my phone started showing me video and audio from our Ring camera. She triggered the motion sensor when she picked up an Amazon package and, while talking on the phone, was setting up a meeting with another guy. She even mentioned you and Kathy helping her out, like you guys had been in on it the whole time. It sounded like you were part of the whole thing." Ben stared at his friend in disbelief. 2 marriages gone because one 304 couldn't keep her legs closed and forgot about a camera. Alistair exhaled in frustration. "So, Kathy cheated too? I hadn't even considered it, but it makes sense she'd be doing the same thing, covering for her." Ben shook his head. "Actually, I'm pretty convinced Kathy didn't cheat. I overheard her talking earlier, and I'm sure she didn't step out on Alistair." Alistair raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "So, if she didn't cheat, why are you getting rid of her? It would almost be easier to forgive her if she had slept with someone else. But it's worse than that," Ben said, frustration in his voice. "The problem isn't just the cheating, it's the trust. She lied to me over and over about everything, about her actions, about your situation, and then used our friendship to cover it up. She made me an unwilling participant in deceiving you. How am I supposed to stay in a marriage with someone I can't trust anymore, and who my best friend now hates?" Alistair paused, thinking about what Ben said. "You can rebuild trust. Maybe not mine, after what she did, but Kathy does love you. Are you really sure this is the end?" Ben shook his head. "I think so. Trust, once broken, isn't something that can ever go back to being as strong as it was. People might forgive, but they never forget. I'm not going to waste my life holding on to this, hoping that in a few years, it'll be a distant memory. She knew exactly what she was doing. There's nothing left to say that will fix this. It's time for me to walk away and start fresh." Alistair looked at Ben with a mix of admiration and envy. "Even through all of this, you stay so composed. You'll have a clean break with an amicable divorce, and you'll both be on good terms. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out which Mexican brothel rents out 304s for donkey shows so I can find her a job that matches her skill set and lower my alimony payments. I'm honestly in awe of how you just see life for what it is. You choose your path, and you just keep moving forward." Ben chuckled at Alistair's dark humor. As much as it felt like his world was falling apart, A part of him knew he'd be okay in the end. He'd head home, talk to Kathy, and while she'd probably cry and beg for counseling, he already knew how it would play out. She'd beg, promise things would change, but deep down, he knew he couldn't accept what she had done. There was no way he could just let it go. The trust was broken beyond repair, and Kathy knew it too. He could feel that the chapter of his marriage to her had reached its end. It was time to move forward, to pick a new direction, and to see what else was out there for him. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Now, before we start today's story, I would like to inform all our listeners that Ben caught Kathy with Roger, once again doing what the Thai people call doing the boom boom. Like every husband who catches his wife cheating, Ben vomited at the bedroom door and left home in his Ford Mustang for parts unknown. Last we heard, he has adopted a female German Shepherd and named her Kathy. He now drives a Camaro and wears a t-shirt that says "Kathy is my bitch" and has a horse. Kathy never cleaned the mess at the bedroom door and looks at it every day and cries. Goddamn, that woman is miserable. Roger was assaulted by 70 bikers while he was having his ice cream. Having the ice cream cone stuffed up the wrong end of your anatomy, with the ice cream still in it, was not a pleasant experience. He will take some time to recover from the beating. We will keep you posted as to when our main characters can return. I will miss them. Now let's start with today's story. I've always believed that life needs a bit of humor. You know, the world's serious enough with bills, deadlines, and trying not to step in something while you're distracted on your phone. That's probably why I ended up in zoology, cracking jokes with the students, keeping things light. Because, honestly, who doesn't need a little bit of Ace Ventura energy in their life? Animals, gym, and the occasional dive bar. My holy trinity. But sometimes, when I'm quiet and alone, those old lessons from my father sneak back in. Dad wasn't one for lengthy lectures, but the few times he decided to get serious, you listened. The man had a way of cutting through the bullshit. On his deathbed, of all places, he gave me a piece of wisdom I'll never forget. He looked at me with those tired, knowing eyes and said, "Jake, if a woman tells you she doesn't need a man, agree with her and walk away. Life's too short to convince someone who's already decided she doesn't want you. And if she's controlling your life, son, you're already living in hell. If you let her control you, well, then you deserve hell. If she rejects logic just to satisfy her ego, smile, open the door like a gentleman, and once she's out, slam it shut like a caveman." At the end of the day, Dad wasn't just telling me how to deal with women. He was telling me how to deal with life. At the time, I just nodded along. I was young, dumb, and thought I had it all figured out. All right, let me set the scene for you. Picture your typical Tuesday afternoon on campus. I'm giving a lecture on animal mating rituals, always a student favorite, cracking jokes, keeping things lively. Class wraps up, and I'm heading out, mentally planning my next gym session, when I bump into Brenda. Now, Brenda, she's something else. Tall, with this kind of fierce, almost intimidating confidence. She's one of those people who walks like they own the place, and frankly, with looks like hers, she just might. She's a professor too, gender studies and political science. Now, normally, that's the kind of thing that would send me running in the opposite direction. I've always been more comfortable around, well, actual animals than people who argue about how humans should behave. But there was something about her that just grabbed me by the gut and didn't let go. Yeah, I'll admit it. She was hot. Smoking hot. The kind of hot that makes you overlook things. Like the fact that she was constantly talking about the patriarchy, or how she'd lecture me on the systemic oppression of women every time I tried to joke about something. But hey, we've all got our quirks, right? Besides, it's not like I was looking for my soulmate. So, naturally, I asked her out. To my surprise, she said yes. First date was dinner at some vegan place she picked out. Trust me, you haven't truly suffered until you've pretended to enjoy a plate of kale with a smile. But that smile of hers? Yeah, it made it worth it. The thing is, Brenda had this way of talking that was, well, kind of mesmerizing. She was so passionate, so convinced of every word that came out of her mouth. And okay, maybe half the time I didn't really get what she was saying about dismantling gender norms or decolonizing thought or whatever, but she was saying it with those intense eyes of hers, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to kiss her. So, I did. And for the next 2 months, I found myself tangled up in Brenda's world. We'd have these debates over dinner, her spouting off theories, me trying to keep up, both of us laughing when we hit a wall. It was surprisingly fun. And the nights? Man, those were the kind of passionate, can't keep your hands, other kind of nights that leave you breathless. Eventually, it just kind of made sense to move in together. I mean, why not? I was spending more nights at her place than my own anyway, and things felt good. Easy. Well, easy in the way that jumping into the deep end is easy. You either swim or you drown. But Brenda? She made me want to swim. Sure, there were a few moments where I wondered if I was getting in too deep. Like when she would critique something as basic as the way I joked with my buddies, saying it was problematic or whatever. But I'd just smile, give her that charming grin of mine, and pull her in for a kiss to change the subject. Worked every time. Besides, a wise man once told me, if a woman's telling you how to think, you're already in trouble. But, damn, trouble never looked so hot. So here I am, living with Brenda, enjoying the amazing sex and thinking with the only organ that my heart could pump blood to. Alright, so let me tell you about Brenda's friends. If you ever want to see how deep the rabbit hole of self-righteousness goes, just spend an evening with those people. The type that can take the most innocent comment and turn it into an example of internalized misogyny, or whatever the latest buzzword of the week is. They were always trying to catch me slipping, trying to humiliate me with these snide, passive-aggressive remarks, usually wrapped in that faux intellectual tone that's supposed to make them sound clever. But here's the thing. I'm not some dumb gym rat who just lifts heavy things and stares blankly when people start using big words. I can go toe-to-toe with the best of them, especially when it comes to logic. So every time they tried to trip me up, I'd turn it around on them. They'd throw shade. I'd shine it right back in their faces, always with a smile that said, I'm not just keeping up, I'm winning. Brenda would laugh it off, pretend to be amused by the banter, but I could tell there was something about it that bugged her. Maybe she didn't like that her unenlightened boyfriend could outsmart her enlightened friends. Or maybe it was just that I never played the part she had mentally cast me in. But the real kicker came with the whole spiritual trip thing. So, one night, she bursts into the apartment, all excited, talking about how she's planning this amazing trip to Southeast Asia, Indonesia, to be exact. She starts going on about how it's going to be this transformative, soul-awakening journey. Something about reconnecting with the earth, purging bad energies, blah blah blah. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for travel. Hell, I've been wanting to see Komodo dragons in their natural habitat since I was a kid. But when I hear spiritual journey, my bullshit meter goes into overdrive. I did what any rational person would do. I pointed out the obvious. Bryn, it's monsoon season there. We're talking floods, landslides, washed out roads. We'd be stuck inside, watching the rain pour down for days. I figured I was doing us both a favor by trying to be practical. But then she hits me with it. The attitude, the eye roll, the full-on lecture. Jake, I know what I'm doing. You think I haven't researched this? This isn't some silly vacation. It's a spiritual journey. And by the way, I'm sponsoring the whole thing. So maybe you just need to shut up and be grateful. That's when I felt the familiar knot tighten in my gut. The one that says, all right, buddy, here we go again. She's pulling the classic Brenda move. When logic doesn't fit into her grand plans, she shuts it down with attitude. And yeah, she's throwing money into the mix now, like I'm some charity case she's dragging along on her dime. The old me, the guy before Dad's deathbed advice, would have swallowed it down, tried to keep the peace. But these days, I'm not about to let anyone, no matter how hot they are, turn me into a yes man. So, I just looked at her, shrugged, and said, sure, Brenda, whatever you say. But I wasn't about to just roll over. Here's the thing. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve too. I'll let her think she's won this round. I'll play the obedient boyfriend. But if she thinks I'm going to be her little spiritual lapdog on this trip, she's got another thing coming. Besides, I am the a-hole who got a free trip to Indonesia. So, before you guys go down in that comment section and call me a simp, remember, I am getting a free trip to Indonesia. So here I am, in Indonesia, right in the thick of it. I thought maybe, just maybe, Brenda's spiritual trip would be a chance for us to connect, maybe relax a bit. But nope. The moment we landed, we were joined by Brenda's two flying monkeys, blue-haired, liberal feminist, left-leaning, man-hating champions of everything that hates guys like me. Let's just say the testosterone levels in this group were hitting record lows. They were thrilled to be here, of course. Our first stop? A meditation resort. While they were out there chanting, realigning their chakras, or whatever they do to commune with their inner goddess or Mother Earth or something, I was taking advantage of the daily full-body massages. And hey, if Brenda's footing the bill, I'm not going to say no to an hour of getting my knots worked out. Call it my personal spiritual journey, if you will. It was all fine, relatively peaceful, until one of Brenda's friends, the one with the septum piercing and the I hate patriarchy tank top, decided to make conversation. She asked me about my work and I figured, fine, Let's play nice. I told her about my research on Komodo dragons, specifically their venom and how we're studying its potential medical uses. To my surprise, all three of them were suddenly interested. Oh my God, Jake, can we go see the Komodo dragons in person? One of them squealed, eyes wide with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen since I was 10 years old watching Jurassic Park for the first time. I tried to be the voice of reason. Look, it's monsoon season right now, I said. The waters are rough. The boats to Komodo Island are not exactly luxury yachts, and the last thing we want is to be caught in a storm in the middle of the ocean. But of course, logic doesn't mean much when you're dealing with people who think facts are just tools of oppression. They dismissed me outright, saying I was just trying to ruin their adventure because I was a killjoy and afraid to take risks. For the next 2 days, I endured their collective wrath. Every meal, every stroll, it was the same. Snide comments about how I was just another toxic male trying to control their freedom, how I was too scared to embrace the unknown. It was like being pecked to death by 3 self-righteous parrots who'd memorized every TED Talk on the evils of masculinity. By the time dinner rolled around on the second day, I was at my breaking point. I can handle a lot. Hell, I've worked with unpredictable animals my entire life. But this was a different kind of endurance test. Every joke, every attempt to lighten the mood was shot down, twisted into something sinister. But here's the thing. I'm not the kind of guy to blow up. Dad always said, if they want to see you crack, that's when you smile wider. So, I plastered on that grin, laughed along with their digs, even raised a glass to their bravery for wanting to go to Komodo Island despite my irrational fears. You know that feeling when you're staring down at something you know is going to go sideways, but you just have to watch it unfold because you're powerless to stop it? Yeah, that was me when Brenda and her 2 pet feminists announced they'd already booked a boat to Komodo Island. They went behind my back after I told them it wasn't safe. One of them, let's call her Septum Piercing, looked me dead in the eye, practically daring me to object. We don't need you, Jake, she said, her voice dripping with defiance. We've already got it handled. Great. Just fantastic. But then Brenda turned to me with that look, the one she gets when she's about to launch into one of her lectures on gender equality. Jake, she said, her voice all sweet and condescending, I want you to come with us. I need to show you how a real woman deals with her life. You and I are equals, you know. Anything you can do, I can do just as well. Oh, the irony. I've seen Komodo dragons take down a full-grown water buffalo with a single bite, patiently waiting for the venom to do its work. But here I was, dealing with a different kind of venom, the human variety, and it was slowly draining my patience. Still, I couldn't just let them walk into danger. They might think they're invincible, but those dragons? They don't care how empowered you are. So, despite every instinct telling me to let them go and learn a harsh lesson, I agreed to tag along. The whole boat ride there was just more of the same. 3 hours of being berated, mocked, and lectured. You're just scared, Jake, one of them said, a smirk plastered on her face. You're so used to controlling everything around you. You can't handle a woman making her own decisions. I smiled, clenched my jaw, and let them talk. My dad's voice echoed in my head. Let them talk, son. The louder they get, the more they expose themselves. But I kept a close eye on the storm clouds gathering in the distance, the waves getting choppier by the minute. I didn't say a word, knowing full well that any attempt to point out the obvious would just feed into their narrative that I was trying to control them. Brenda, of course, was soaking it all in, loving how her friends were, putting me in my place. When we finally got off the boat on Komodo Island, the sky was a brooding gray, heavy with rain waiting to fall. The air smelled of salt and rot, the jungle dense and dark just beyond the shoreline. The 3 of them stepped onto the island like they were conquering heroes, completely oblivious to the very real danger lurking in the shadows. As we were unloading, one of the local boatmen, a grizzled old guy with leathery skin and a permanent squint, leaned in close to me. His voice was low, barely a whisper, as he muttered in broken English, "You run." Before too late, I looked into his eyes and saw something there. Fear, or maybe pity. Either way, it sent a chill down my spine. Because this wasn't just some friendly advice. This was the warning of a man who knew exactly what was out there waiting for us. But turning back wasn't an option now. Not when Brenda was so determined to prove her point. Not when I knew that if I bailed, they'd just keep pushing deeper into the jungle, completely unaware of what they were walking into. So, I squared my shoulders, nodded to the old boatman, and followed them onto the island, all while wondering how the hell I got myself into this mess. and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to find out exactly what he meant. The moment we set foot on Komodo Island, I had that prickling sensation at the back of my neck. You know, the one that tells you you're about to walk headfirst into a mess. As we hit the shore, I turned to Brenda and her two sidekicks and asked the most basic question. Where's the guide? Septum Piercing laughed like I had just told the world's funniest joke. A guide? Oh, Jake, you're so precious. We don't need a guide. Brenda backed her up, flashing me that infuriating, patronizing smile she reserved for moments like these. Relax, Jake. It's not like we're helpless. We've read about the island. We know what we're doing. They casually started walking toward the jungle like it was Central Park on a sunny afternoon. I shook my head, trying to suppress the urge to tell them off. But I couldn't help myself. This isn't a park. It's a goddamn jungle, I called out, my voice getting drowned out by the sudden clap of thunder overhead. People get killed here. And then, as if nature was throwing its weight behind my argument, the sky opened up, drenching us in a torrential downpour. It was like someone had just flipped a switch. The women shrieked, more annoyed than concerned, and darted toward the trees for cover. Meanwhile, I did what I always do. I looked around for someone who actually knew what they were doing. I spotted a guy in a weather-beaten uniform, looking more like he belonged in a war zone than a tourist destination. I jogged over to him, hoping he might have some good news. The park's closed, he said in broken English, shouting over the rain. Too dangerous now. Only a few of us here to keep watch. His eyes flicked to the women, who were laughing and splashing around like this was some spontaneous adventure. I could see it on his face. He knew the type. He gave me a look that said, "Good luck, brother. You're going to need it." I hustled back to Brenda and her entourage, already soaked to the bone. "We need to get back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There are barely any staff here, and they've shut the park down. We have to call for the boat and get off this island." Brenda looked at me like I was the village idiot. "Oh, Jake, stop being such a drama queen," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "We came here to explore, not to be told what to do." The other two chimed in with their usual chorus. "We don't need a man to tell us how to handle ourselves." And just like that, they turned their backs on me and marched deeper into the jungle. I stood there for a second, letting the rain hammer down on my face, wondering how the hell I ended up here. Trying to keep alive three women who were hellbent on proving they didn't need me or anyone else. As they disappeared into the dense foliage, I had no choice but to follow. Because, despite everything, I couldn't just walk away. Not when I knew the kind of predators lurking in these shadows, the ones with scales, claws, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And I had a sinking feeling that the island wasn't going to be as forgiving as I was. There's a certain kind of darkness in the jungle that plays tricks on your mind. It's not just the absence of light. It's the way every rustle, every distant cry feels like something watching, waiting. As night fell, the reality that we were truly lost started to sink in. The rain had tapered off, leaving the air thick with the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves. My instincts were screaming that we needed to stop, regroup, and figure this out. "Hold up," I said, trying to get their attention. "We're going to get even more lost if we keep going like this." But my words were like smoke in the wind. Brenda, Septum Piercing, and Blue Hair were too busy stomping through the underbrush, arguing about the best way to find the beach. They were convinced they'd just follow the sound of the waves like some bad survival show. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "We need to stay away from the beaches," I told them, keeping my voice steady. Komodo dragons patrol the shoreline at night looking for dead fish. They're not the cute little lizards you see at the pet store. They'll rip you apart, but, of course, they didn't want to hear it. "You know nothing, Jon Snow," Blue Hair sneered, quoting Game of Thrones like this was some kind of joke. The other two erupted in laughter, their voices loud enough to carry through the jungle. "Perfect. Let's just announce our presence to every hungry predator within a mile." Brenda turned to me, her eyes narrowed, that familiar mix of arrogance and condescension plastered on her face. "We're going to the beach," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "If you're scared, then go find your own way. But don't blame us when we're sipping cocktails back at the resort." That's when I realized I'd hit my limit. I was done trying to save people who didn't want saving. I was done with the constant belittling, the snide comments, the condescending laughter. I'd put up with it this whole trip, swallowing my pride for the sake of peace. But there's only so much a man can take, especially when the stakes are this high. I looked Brenda dead in the eyes, feeling something cold settle in my gut. I'm not risking a bite from a Komodo dragon just to prove a point. The massages were nice, Brenda, but they're not worth getting torn apart for. I shook my head and took a step back. You want to walk into the lion's den? Be my guest. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, leaving them to their arrogant bravado. I could hear them calling after me, mocking me, telling me I was weak, a coward. But for the first time since we set foot on this godforsaken island, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'd done my part. I'd warned them, tried to keep them safe. But I wasn't going to be dragged into their ego-fueled death wish. As I headed toward the stream, using the moonlight filtering through the trees to guide me, I couldn't help but wonder if this was what Dad meant. Sometimes, you just have to let people face the consequences of their own decisions. Maybe they'd be fine. Maybe they'd find their way back to the boat without incident. But deep down, I knew the island had its own plans, and it wasn't as forgiving as I was. I'll never forget that moment when I stumbled upon the wooden post, barely visible in the darkness. Relief hit me like a wave. Finally, a sliver of hope in this cursed place. The guard, a wiry guy who looked like he'd seen more than his share of danger, was sitting there with a walkie-talkie in his hand, the static hissing like a bad omen. I was out of breath and soaked to the bone, but I managed to get the words out. There are 3 women. They went into the jungle. They're lost. He looked at me with eyes that were far too calm for the situation. Shaking his head slowly, he said, "We can't go in there. Not now. Too dangerous at night, especially after the rain." I could feel my stomach drop. But they don't know what they're doing. They're not equipped for this. My voice was rising, but he just held up a hand. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and steady. "The island is closed. Most of the guards left. It's just me and a few others. The jungle is too dangerous after dark, especially with the rain. We go in now, we don't come back." I wanted to argue, to scream, to demand that he do something. But the truth is, I knew he was right. I'd seen enough in my line of work to understand that nature doesn't care about your pride or your politics. It's indifferent to whether you think you're strong, independent, or invincible. Out here, all that matters is survival. So, I did the only thing I could do. I waited. I paced that tiny post like a caged animal, listening to the rain pounding on the roof, my mind running in circles. I replayed everything over and over. The warnings I'd given, the arrogance in their voices, the moment I'd turned my back. Maybe I should have forced them to listen, dragged them away if I had to. But I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't have made a difference. They were determined to prove they didn't need me, or any man, for that matter. The night stretched on forever. The rain didn't let up, turning the jungle into a muddy, slippery death trap. The guard tried to get some sleep, but I couldn't even sit down. Every rustle outside, every distant call of some unknown animal, sent my nerves into overdrive. I kept imagining them out there, huddled together, scared out of their minds. Or worse, coming face to face with something that wouldn't hesitate to turn them into dinner. By the time the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I was already out the door. The guard reluctantly agreed to come with me, but he made it clear we weren't going far. "If we don't find them soon, we turn back," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We combed through the jungle, shouting their names, hoping for some sign of life. But all we found was silence. The rain had washed away any tracks, and the jungle was eerily still, as if it had swallowed them whole. After hours of searching, we came up empty. No sign of Brenda, no sign of her friends. Just endless trees, thick mud, and that suffocating feeling of dread pressing down on me. I stood there, drenched and exhausted, staring into the dense foliage as if somehow I could will them to appear. But they didn't. They were gone, just like the guard had warned. Swallowed by the very jungle they thought they could conquer. And all I could think was, I tried to tell them. I tried. But in the end, it didn't matter. Nature doesn't care about debates or ideologies. Out here, all that matters is who survives. And sometimes, you have to let people make their own mistakes, even if it means they don't come back from them. The moment the police walked into that wooden outpost, I knew my nightmare was just beginning. I had barely slept in days, my mind replaying every second of that godforsaken jungle trek. As soon as I was back in the city, they put me through the ringer with questions. And who could blame them? 3 women had vanished, and I was the last one to see them alive. I told them everything I could remember. How I warned them, how they refused to listen, how they walked straight into danger, blind with arrogance. For hours, it felt like I was being treated like a criminal. Every detail I gave, every statement I made, they scrutinized as if searching for cracks. But thankfully, the boatmen and the guards backed up my story. They saw how I tried to convince Brenda and her friends to turn back, how they dismissed me like I was just some annoying fly buzzing around their heads. It wasn't enough to save their lives, but at least it was enough to clear my name. They kept me in Indonesia for 3 days while they conducted their search. 3 days of hell, waiting in that hotel room. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of what had happened. I'd stare out of the window, hoping, no, praying, they'd find them alive. Maybe they'd been holed up somewhere, hiding from the rain, waiting for rescue. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd been around wild animals long enough to recognize the scent of death. Eventually, they let me go. There was nothing more I could do, nothing left to say. I flew home, trying to leave that place behind me, but it haunted me like a shadow. Then, a week later, the call came. 3 bodies found in the jungle. The police officer's voice was cold, detached, as he described their condition: poisoning from Komodo dragon bites. The beasts had done what they do best, scavenged what was left. I should have felt some relief when he told me that the boatmen and guards had corroborated my story, that the families had finally accepted it wasn't my fault. But it didn't bring me any comfort. They were still dead. Brenda, with all her fire and passion, was gone. And so were her friends. Their arrogance, their refusal to listen. It had cost them their lives. Every time I close my eyes, I still see them laughing at me, mocking me, telling me I didn't know what I was talking about. And then I see them again, in the jungle, helpless against creatures that couldn't care less about ideologies or equality. Out there, it's kill or be killed. Nature has no mercy, no patience for hubris. I tried to warn them. I really did. But in the end, I did what my dad told me. If she rejects logic just to satisfy her ego, smile, open the door like a gentleman, and once she's out, slam it shut like a caveman. Walking into Septum Piercing's funeral, I had to brace myself. It wasn't just the heavy air of grief. It was the cold stares from everyone in the room. I could feel their eyes boring into me, silent accusations hanging in the air like a noose. I shouldn't have gone. I knew that. But a part of me wanted to pay my respects, to close the chapter, even if it meant stepping right into the lion's den of judgment. I didn't go alone. 2 of my gym buddies, Mike and Dan, tagged along. They weren't close to Brenda or her friends, but they knew the story. Hell, they'd heard me rant about it for months. The insults, the stubbornness, the way those women treated me like I was a caveman just for using common sense. Mike and Dan had my back, and for that, I was grateful. We all knew it would be an uncomfortable scene, but none of us expected the tension to be this thick. Who am I kidding with these heavy words? They just wanted to see a half-eaten Komodo dragon victim. When the time came to carry the casket of the one who'd given me the most hell, the loudest, the most aggressive of Brenda's crew, I didn't flinch. As much as she and I had butted heads, there was still something profoundly sobering about carrying her lifeless body or what was left of it. The finality of it all hit me, but only for a second, then it went away. Because just as we lifted the casket, I heard it. Mike's voice, a whisper just for our group. That's a light deadlift. I almost lost it right there. It was so inappropriate, so darkly timed, but also exactly the kind of grim humor that had gotten me through these past weeks. I bit my cheek to keep from laughing, my eyes watering. Not from grief, but from holding back the absurdity of the situation. This woman, who had spent so much time tearing me down, was now reduced to this, a weight I could lift with one hand if I wanted. And maybe that's what made it so painfully ironic. All that bravado, all that self-righteous fury, and now it came down to this. Being carried out of this world by the very man she loved to belittle. I don't know if it made me a bad person, but as we set her down, I couldn't help but think. She finally found out the hard way that life isn't a debate you can win with words. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
I'm in a difficult situation and seeking insight. My wife, 39 female, and I, 40 male, have been married for 17 years. We're high school sweethearts and have been together for about 23 years. I don't have much information, but here's what I know. 3 days ago, my wife came home from work, and on the 4th day, she had to work. She appeared frantic, emotional, packed an overnight bag hastily, and left. Our oldest daughter was home at the time and witnessed it. I tried talking to her, but she was crying, distraught, and couldn't speak. She seemed on the verge of a panic. She hasn't responded to our texts or calls. I contacted her parents immediately, and they eventually replied. informing me that my wife is safe with them and asking for patience and understanding. That's all I heard from them. I reached out to her sister, brother, and one of her close work friends. Her brother claimed to know nothing, and her work friend said she was at work in the morning but had left by lunch 3 days ago. That's all she knew. It's been 3 days with no contact from my wife, not even with the kids. No one is providing any information. I'm here with my 3 daughters trying to manage without her. The kids keep asking me what's happening, questioning what happened with their mom. All I can say is that she's at her grandparents' place, and we need to be patient and understanding. I have a strong urge to quickly pack up the kids and drive to her parents' house without notice. It's only a 3-hour drive, and waiting in limbo is agonizing. The kids believe we had a major fight and are getting a divorce, but that's far from the truth. We rarely argue, and the kids are aware of this. I'm uncertain about what's happening, but I'm looking for some logical perspective because my current emotional state has me going in circles while trying to manage everything without her. If something unfortunate occurred, wouldn't a spouse's family be the first to know? Maybe some past trauma resurfaced, but if it were me, I'd turn to my wife for support. We're completely in the dark, and nothing makes sense. I don't know what to do, and I'm stuck here with my daughters. We're all clueless, and no one is sharing any information. I'm feeling worried, scared, angry, and a mix of emotions. Why would someone ghost their family like this? It was an affair. It was a long night last night, and I didn't sleep. My father-in-law didn't call me last night, so I eventually contacted the police, as many of you suggested. This caused a lot of issues that I won't go into, but my wife has been having an affair for at least 2 years, probably longer. Everyone was right. The other man had a heart attack on Tuesday and passed away that night for sure. My mother-in-law, and it seems like my sister-in-law, knew about it and covered for her. My wife still hasn't contacted me or the kids. I'm trying to keep this from them for now. Honestly, I have no idea what to do from here. That's all I know. This is almost the end for me. I'm not sure how to move on from this news, but that's it. If you pray, please pray for me and us. One, come up with something reasonable. Why would you ghost your family like this? It's been just over a week since my D-Day, and since that day, I've learned my wife's affair lasted over 4 years. I don't have an exact timeline yet, but it likely started emotionally and then became physical. I'm curious how the pandemic and lockdowns played into this too. Many questions remain unanswered. Anyway, my in-laws paid an unplanned visit to see their grandchildren yesterday. My wife, who has been staying at their house since this ordeal began, didn't spend much time with the girls, just about 15 minutes. Afterward, they asked to speak with me privately. It was a lengthy conversation, as you'd expect, and I won't go into all the details. In short, my wife wants to return home but is afraid of the consequences of her actions. Her parents probed to find out if I intended to divorce and tried to persuade me to forgive my wife and rebuild our marriage. They seemed ashamed and embarrassed, but also wanted my wife out of their house. The exchange was civil and respectful. I admit that I told them I wasn't sure about my future plans, although I fully intend to divorce. I believe that revealing my plans now would hinder me from getting the truth from my wife. I want her to face me and explain everything if possible. We've been together for 17 years, with 3 kids and countless memories. I want her to be honest and set an example for our children. I'm unsure if my approach is right. Legally, I cannot prevent my wife from coming home. The lawyer made this clear, so if she decides to come home, I can't stop her, even though I don't want it right now. My daughters and I have established a routine, so I made a challenging request. I told her she could return home when she sat down with me in person, answered all my questions about her affair, and spoke with the girls, apologizing to them and answering their questions as well. This seemed fair since they already know. She doesn't have to comply with these demands legally, but I'm considering if her fear of facing us could work to our advantage. I don't want to be sneaky or manipulative. I prefer not to start cohabitating yet, if possible. There's a mandatory 90-day waiting period for divorce in our state. Her return home is inevitable, and we'll both have to go back to work eventually. Life will move on despite this mess. I'd like to delay it to plan and improve my mental and emotional well-being. My wife has been texting our girls, apologizing and expressing that she doesn't want a divorce. They've shared the texts with me and inquire about me daily. The reality of her actions is affecting her, especially in the last couple of days. How should I handle this? Was my request unreasonable? It seems that my wife will return home soon, and I want to make the best decision for my daughters and myself as we move forward. I'm not rattled by this. I knew it would happen eventually, and I'm confident in my current path. It was a tough weekend, but my wife returned home yesterday, with some build-up during the week. Unlike previous times when she'd enter the house and we'd hug and kiss, it was incredibly awkward this time. She initiated a hug, but I turned away as if nothing had happened. After she settled in, I naturally asked her to tell me everything, but she said she wasn't ready. We had spoken on the phone earlier in the week with the same result. I insisted that her return depended on her explaining her absence for nearly 3 weeks, but she repeated that she wasn't ready. I tried to maintain my composure and not scream at her, but I couldn't. I told her about her affair, which had lasted over 4 years with a coworker, her plans to leave me for him, and how she had ghosted her family. I also expressed my desire for a divorce. Her reaction was unexpected. She seemed surprised by how much I knew about the affair and just stood there in silence, wide-eyed, staring at the floor. We stood in the kitchen for 5 minutes without speaking, and it was an incredibly strange and tense moment. She didn't know how to respond, and neither did I. I read all your comments and advice regarding my situation. I even took notes and mentally prepared myself for every possible outcome of this confrontation, except the one that happened. So right then and there, I decided to map out everything I knew about her affair. Maybe it wasn't the best idea, but I proceeded to tell her everything I knew, even adding my assumptions about certain things, like how she met her affair partner, her sister's involvement, what happened during COVID, etc. She kept staring at the floor throughout. I grew angrier as I went along because she didn't respond, but I tried to keep my voice down and remain composed. Then there was another long, awkward silence. My anger turned into sadness as I realized everything. I softly asked her what I did to drive her away, whether she ever loved me, and if her affair partner was worth it. She didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there with her head down. No tears, no apology, no yelling, no explanation. Just silence. This hurt more than D-Day did. I just stood there, unsure if I could move. But things got worse. Our daughters overheard the whole encounter. I was incredibly stupid and didn't consider their whereabouts once I confronted my wife. Our oldest daughter came downstairs and lashed out. There was a lot of pent-up anger on her part. My wife quickly went upstairs and locked the bedroom door. That's where we are now. I heard my wife crying most of the night until I fell asleep. Only our youngest tried talking to her. The rest of us have avoided her. If I can muster the courage, I'm thinking of suggesting she stay with her sister until we finalize the divorce. But this is still her home. Cohabitating with her will be miserable for all of us. I was wrong about my wife, and you were all right. I was wrong about our years together, our memories, and the life-changing moments. I was convinced she would apologize and confess to everything from the last 4 years to relieve her guilt. But we're not worth it to her. Maybe we never were. What now? Today was uncomfortable at home. We tried to carry on like the past 2 weeks, but it's impossible. I just want to fast forward through all of this, past the divorce, past the awkward conversations, past the inevitable arguments, and past the drama of cohabitating with a wayward spouse. How did you manage that, especially with kids? I know this is just the beginning. I keep reading posts that promise it gets better, but I'm far from that point. There's not a moment when I don't want to scream or sob right now. I'm trying my hardest to keep a stable mind for the girls, but I don't know if I can do it for 3 more months. School will start before this is all over. I guess this is my life now. Thank you for caring so much. I don't know if the worst is behind or ahead of us, but I appreciate any advice to get through the next phase. I'm in a bad place and have been since my wayward wife came home after I found out about her affair. I've been pretending for my daughters, trying to say and think the right things, but tonight I have to admit the truth. As many of you say, the emotions come in waves, but tonight it hit me hard, and I lost my composure a bit. The divorce is filed, but my wayward wife hasn't hired a lawyer yet. I've been patient and delicate, hoping for an uncontested divorce that we mainly handle ourselves. But after tonight, I'm not so sure. We've been cohabitating during the week, and my wife goes to her sister's house on Fridays and returns on Sundays since her work is close, but her sister's an hour away. For the past couple of weeks, we've followed this routine with mostly avoidance. I've been trying to put my daughters first and meet their needs, but I got emotional tonight and didn't consider their whereabouts when confronting my wife. So our oldest daughter came downstairs and lashed out, and my wife quickly went upstairs and locked the bedroom door. That's where we are now. I heard my wife crying most of the night. Only our youngest tried talking to her, and the rest of us avoided her. It's for the best, right? Lately, I've heeded much of your advice, and I've worked hard to maintain self-discipline around my wife, even when it's tough. I've been short and indifferent when we briefly talk, but always polite and respectful. Until tonight. The last couple of Fridays, she left for her sister's before I got home from work, but tonight she was waiting in the kitchen. I tried to walk past, but she stopped me and asked if this is how I'm going to treat her just because she's not ready to talk about her affair. This is the first time she's mentioned it in almost a month. I tried to keep quiet and walk away, but our daughters weren't home and I lost control. I unleashed all my frustrations, pain, anger, and misery on her. I went on for a long time, raising my voice and getting emotional. I told her everything that's been tormenting me, everything I'd been holding back. I was so mad at myself afterward. I'd been doing well, but she got to me. I knew it would happen. I knew it. It's been building for a while, and there's only so much I can vent. For the first time, my wayward wife actually broke down and started sobbing uncontrollably. Regrettably, this made me happy, seeing her hurt as I was. I wished I didn't care, but there was some satisfaction in finally seeing her break down. It seemed like there was someone in there with a bit of compassion. Surprisingly, she mumbled apologies repeatedly during my outburst. She was ugly crying, and all she said was, "I'm so sorry." But in the end, I left the kitchen before she could gather herself enough to say anything more. I asked her to leave me alone. So that happened. She hung around the kitchen for a while before leaving for her sister's house again. The girls got home about half an hour later and could tell something had happened. But I wasn't ready to discuss it. I don't think they need to know about this, do they? The two youngest are doing better, and I don't want to disrupt their progress. Telling my oldest would only add more fuel to her fire, which I don't want. I hate this so much. I should have kept it together and just ignored my wayward wife or walked past her. Now, thinking back, it feels like she was trying to start a conversation about her affair but didn't know how to, and it obviously didn't go well because I exploded. I've started to worry about her, though. I know some of you may criticize me for this, but I don't want her to come too. She's been isolated and alone with her thoughts, with nearly everyone turning their back on her. You can say she deserves it, and that's true, but she's still a human being and the mother of my kids. This is a setback for me, and I'm really disappointed in myself. Sorry for the long rant. I also talked to my brother and ranted to him. I'll try to start fresh on Monday. I'm only human. It felt good to vent on her, but now I'm feeling regret. Should I text my wife or leave it be? I'm a mess, but thanks for listening and offering the support I need to get through all of this. And thank you for all the advice. In the midst of the chaos, we've all started therapy, so that's something, but this is incredibly hard, just so hard. I appreciate those of you who reached out to me, and I'm aware that most of you were right. Things aren't great, and I haven't had the chance to get online at all. I thought about taking a break from the internet, but this week has been a step backward. It's just been awful. My wife hasn't left me alone all week, being overly nice and continually apologizing for her affair, sobbing and trying to talk to me. I've ignored her at times, but talked when I was in the mood. I finally snapped at her on Wednesday night, telling her to leave me alone. Then, last night, it happened. Just over a month since my soon-to-be ex-wife returned home after her affair came to light. As things have become this uncomfortable, cohabitating routine, she came into my room after the girls went to bed and asked to talk with me in private differently than how she'd been approaching me all week. I resisted at first, but eventually we went to the garage and sat in my car to avoid having the conversation in front of the kids. Again, it involved lengthy apologies, and she told me everything. According to her, we were out there for almost 3 hours. I'm not sure how much I should share. I was awake all night, listened to her sob for hours, and couldn't sleep. I cried too, got super angry at times, had to resist the urge to confront her, and it was a cycle of crying and anger. Forgive me if I take a day or so to respond to anyone, but I needed to get this off my chest before trying to sleep. It hasn't helped having my wayward wife constantly apologizing and begging for another chance all evening. Tonight, too, I had to leave for a few hours just to get away from her. It's just so painful to be around her. Anyway, she was introduced to her affair partner by her sister about 5 years ago, with no romantic intentions initially. He was a higher up at a company she wanted to work for, and he gave her an in. So her desire to change jobs was not based on her affair. But once she did change jobs, obviously she had extra incentive. Once she got the job, the affair partner began flirting with her, starting with texting, then pictures, and more texting, leading to physical involvement just before COVID. She confessed to her sister and wanted to come clean to me then, but decided to bury it. Wife said she went no contact with her affair partner soon after, but he reached out to her as lockdowns were lifted, and she resumed talking to him until the physical affair resumed once businesses reopened. She claims to have ended the affair a couple of times out of guilt, but kept going back to him, so it never really ended. She included many details and had a 5-page handwritten timeline of her affair, which she read to me, answering questions along the way. She lied about many things like weekend trips with the girls, work-related travel, traffic jams, and other excuses, just as I suspected. The list of lies was extensive, and there were so many that I never questioned her. It's heartbreaking to hear all this, and even though her affection didn't wane during her affair, I feel worse now. Closeness did change, but not enough to raise red flags. She admitted to falling in love with her affair partner and wanting a life with him, as he promised her expensive things, vacations, and more. She started fantasizing about escaping her family responsibilities, and the thrill of being with him was too much to resist. She talked about how bored she had become with the routine of family life, and she was incredibly candid and emotional. I lost control of my emotions and started crying halfway through. It was painful to hear everything, as one would expect. After she finished her confession, she expressed her love for me and her willingness to do anything to salvage the marriage. Many of you anticipated this, but it all felt insincere to me, like it was rehearsed. I've been with this woman for more than half of my life, and I can tell when she's not being genuine. Maybe I'm mistaken, but it doesn't really matter. I managed to regain my composure better than last week, though I still got angry and said a few unkind things. I even mentioned that her affair partner was involved with multiple women, and that she was just one of many he was willing to discard. That really upset her. A million thoughts crossed my mind about this moment when she would finally confess. All the clever comebacks I might throw at her, or things I could say to hurt her back. There were hundreds of responses that I couldn't think of in the emotional moment the other night. One thing I knew I would ask was whether her affair partner was still alive, and if she had to choose between him and me, who would she pick? She hesitated and then said, "That's not fair." I insisted on an answer, and eventually she said she would choose me, of course. My response was that her hesitation was why I was divorcing her because she was lying again. She started sobbing, and that was the last thing she said. We sat in the car for a while, with her continuing to sob, but I was tired. So I told her that we're getting a divorce, and we owe it to our daughters to get along in a civil way, be great parents, and be present in their lives. I also added that after all the pain she'd put me through, I hoped she was decent enough to divorce amicably. That would be proof that she genuinely loved me. The last thing I told her was borrowed from somewhere else online. Please understand that I'm not a vindictive person, and I didn't want to hurt her deliberately. It just seemed like a fitting way to end it all. But I meant every word I said and did. I leaned over, kissed her on the forehead, and said that I would have loved her forever. Then I got out of the car and went to bed. That was the end of it. Of course, I didn't sleep last night, and here I am, unable to sleep once again tonight. I'm not sure what happens now. Her chance to contest the divorce has passed, so I guess that's one positive thing. But I haven't spoken to my lawyer yet. I'm finding myself in tears again and cycling back into those phases of depression and anger. Hearing everything last night was very difficult, and to be honest, I could have done without it all. Now that I know she could have lied or made it all up, who knows? But it seemed to align with everything I had pieced together over the past month. So, that's where things stand for now. It feels like this is never ending. I have a few good days, start feeling strong, and then something else happens. It seems like it's been months, yet only days at the same time. But I'm going to try to get some sleep. Just imagine the love of your life, the only woman you've ever loved or kissed, telling you she cheated on you for over 4 years because she was bored. There were no falling out of love, growing apart, relationship issues, or a dead bedroom. Just boredom. I don't know if that makes it worse or better. Thanks for listening and offering your help along the way. It's been a tough couple of nights, really tough. Hey guys, I'm really starting to have doubts about the relationship between my girlfriend and my best friend. Their closeness when we're together has raised some concerns, and now I'm not comfortable with them being around each other. My best friend, who's been in my life for about 10 years, recently got out of a toxic relationship. I've been with my girlfriend for the past 6 months, supporting and talking to him as he moves on. I even once left my house in the middle of the night to check on him, thinking he might do bad things to himself. He's doing better now, but he still has a long way to go. I'm feeling uneasy because my girlfriend has started texting him more frequently. We used to have an open phone policy, but I stopped checking her phone over the years due to my trust in her. However, now she's always on it and seems more secretive. I haven't asked to see her phone yet as I don't want to tip her off, but I'm considering it. The last time we all hung out was at a Halloween costume party. It was just 5 of us, my girlfriend and me, my best friend, and 2 other friends. We all drank a lot and played video games until late. We decided to send someone to get food, and my girlfriend, the only sober one, drove. I stayed behind for a game, so I asked my best friend to go with her. They didn't return until 5:45 a.m. Despite leaving at 1 a.m., I got worried and called them with no response. After a while, I started drinking to cope. When my girlfriend got home, I confronted her about where they had been. She said my best friend was upset about his ex, so she stopped to talk to him until he felt better. It felt suspicious, but I had no evidence to accuse her. I had to let it go, but I'm still suspicious and anxious. We're having another party with the same people for my birthday after Christmas. I'm nervous about my girlfriend and best friend being close, but I don't want to create a scene. We've been together for 5 years, and I really want our relationship to work, so I'm unsure about what to do. I'm starting to fear the worst. Update. I checked her phone. Thank you for the advice and support I've received so far. Many people commented and messaged me with their thoughts, and I want to express my gratitude once again. So, on Saturday night when she fell asleep, I looked through her messages with my best friend. My heart was racing. I didn't find any convincing evidence of her cheating on me, but I noticed they text almost daily, with many "what's up" and "how are you" messages from my girlfriend. While not conclusive, this confirms my feelings that they are very close. I'm not comfortable with this, especially since she's not being forthcoming and providing reassurance. I also found that she vented to my best friend about a recent minor argument we had, which is unusual for her, as she's usually secretive about our personal life. He didn't badmouth me, but it's a significant red flag given the context. I also checked for other messaging apps like WhatsApp and Snapchat, but didn't find anything suspicious. I should mention that my partner is tech-savvy, so hiding evidence from me might not be difficult. I can't access her work phone as I don't know the passcode, and I feel paranoid. Everything seemed great between us, but now it feels like a nightmare. Am I wrong for being suspicious? Is she genuinely trying to be a good friend? Am I overreacting? I want our relationship to work, but I'm struggling to calm my mind. What's my plan? I don't want to tip them off by asking them directly. I'm concerned they'll become more secretive. It bothers me, but I want the truth and am willing to wait to be sure. I think my best course of action is to continue observing their behavior at the upcoming party. I'll stay relatively sober, as some of you suggested. Trusting my gut feels valid. Just because everything seems fine on the surface doesn't mean there's no emotional relationship between them. Just because he's my best friend doesn't mean my girlfriend should reach out to him and vent about our arguments. Lately, I've been going out more to keep my mind occupied. I've been hitting the gym and occasionally meeting coworkers for pickup sports. It's been great for my mental and physical health. The day before Christmas Eve, I decided to change my routine and come home a few hours earlier than usual after my gym session. When I entered the house, I found my girlfriend cooking in the kitchen with a recipe on her phone left unattended on the counter. I greeted her, and as I walked past her phone to grab a cup from the cupboard, a text message from my best friend lit up on her phone. Without her realizing, I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and saw what I had suspected. They were both sending explicit photos to each other, or at least that's what I saw, which led me to confront her immediately. I asked her, "What the heck is going on?" She looked at me, and I could tell she understood my question. She quickly went into damage control mode, trying to convince me it was a foolish mistake and that she got carried away because of the attention. This was my best friend. I inquired about how long this had been happening, and she replied, "Recently, about a month or so, but maybe longer." She tearfully apologized repeatedly. I pressed her for details about what had occurred on the night of the Halloween party, as I no longer trusted her words. She admitted that something did happen that night, with tears streaming down her face and a look of nausea. After a lengthy pause, she confessed that he had asked for a closeness favor. Initially, she said no, but eventually gave in. She kept insisting it didn't mean anything, and she did it to make him feel better. I was furious and asked her why they didn't just go all the way if it didn't mean anything. She claimed she would never do that and begged me to believe her. It was hard to trust her after she had admitted to cheating on me. I yelled at her that I didn't believe her and declared that I was ending the relationship. She sobbed uncontrollably and clung to my arm, which I pulled away from before instructing her to leave my place. It was a struggle to get her out the door, but she eventually left. I've been bombarded with texts and phone calls from her, pleading for a second chance. Despite the advice I received, it's incredibly difficult to prepare for a betrayal like this, especially from a partner you deeply care about. Not to mention, I didn't mention it earlier, but my best friend is also my cousin. It's your best friend too. I still love her, but I can't forgive such a massive betrayal. All I can think about is that 5 years have gone to waste, and I feel helpless and broken. To make matters worse, this all happened right before Christmas Eve, which is when we usually celebrate with her family. I decided to stay home and play video games all day. I appreciate the support and advice I've received, as it has been very helpful. Now, I'm focused on picking up the pieces. This is the worst-case scenario, but I believe I'm strong enough to overcome it. I wouldn't put too much stock in her story about the closeness favor. I mean, does it really only take a guy to ask for one and she agrees right away? It wouldn't have taken 5 hours. Plus, that was Halloween. What have they been up to for the last 2 months? And do you really think that was the first time? Well, I guess it really doesn't matter now that it's over.
While scanning the restaurant for the client I was meant to meet, I spotted my ex-wife, Susan, accompanied by a slightly overweight middle-aged man. It was evident he had once been in good shape, but the effects of indulgence and time had altered his physique. Susan sat beside him, radiating contentment. Every aspect of the man hinted at wealth. Standing in the foyer, memories came flooding back to me. Despite 3 years having passed since our divorce, the emotions felt as raw as if it were yesterday. This is how I found myself here, observing from afar rather than being by her side. Nonetheless, as events unfolded, her desires were fulfilled. My troubles began with a trip to Albany for a client meeting. Opting to stay overnight to avoid a lengthy drive back, my plans were disrupted when, barely an hour into the journey, the client called to report a broken fender, though he was undamaged. Apologizing for the late cancellation, he expressed his regret, to which I assured him it was no inconvenience, suggesting we reschedule. Nevertheless, I felt unprepared for the extra 2 hours of driving ahead. Promising to do my best, I planned to return home for a surprise romantic dinner with my beloved wife. 90 minutes later, I finally turned onto my street. The first thing that caught my eye was the presence of 3 unfamiliar cars parked in the driveway. Knowing my wife often invited her friends over when I was away, I didn't think much of it. I parked on the street and entered the house, assuming everything was normal. However, the sight of 4 sets of clothes strewn across the living room floor immediately signaled that something was amiss. As I stood there, a gut-wrenching realization hit me. My wife's passionate cry wasn't a call for help. It was a familiar plea for more intense lovemaking. My heart sank as I grasped the truth. My wife was engaged in a carnal encounter with someone else. Despite my reluctance, I knew I had to face the reality awaiting me upstairs. Upon reaching the top of the stairs, I was met with the sound of my wife emitting a primal scream. Stealthily peering around the bedroom doorframe, I beheld 3 men. While unfamiliar with 2 of them, the third was unmistakably her boss from work, Jeff Davis. To my shock, they had my wife engaged in carnal acts. My disdain for Jeff deepened as he showered her with praise, acknowledging her assistance with his business clients. It sickened me to realize that this idiot was exploiting my wife for his professional gain. All three of them treated her as a mere object of pleasure, using derogatory language and exerting their dominance over her. Witnessing her behavior so alien to the woman I knew during our 10 years of marriage, I couldn't help but agree with Jeff's choice of derogatory label for her. Quietly retreating, I slipped downstairs unnoticed, seeking refuge in my office. Retrieving my digital video camera, I found it still had some battery life. With an old holiday cassette inside and space for recording, I aimed to document my wife's actions for legal purposes rather than creating some illicit spectacle. Setting up the camera at the bedroom door, I captured footage of my wife's face and the others involved, managing to endure only 510 minutes of the ordeal before my emotions overwhelmed me. While some might find such a scene arousing, for me, it brought only sadness and a profound sense of betrayal. Feeling utterly deflated, I sought solace downstairs to collect my thoughts. In my office, I retrieved my weapon from the safe, removing the safety as a precaution. Though not inclined toward violence, I couldn't shake the urge to assert myself if things escalated. Venturing into the living room, I confiscated the car keys and wallets from the discarded pants strewn across the floor, deflating the tires of all vehicles parked outside, including Sue's car. Returning indoors, a sinister grin crossed my face as I concocted a plan, confident it would succeed if Sue took her cell phone. Spotting it on the bedside table during my recording, I readied my camera, positioned myself discreetly behind the stairs, and dialed her number. After several unanswered attempts, she finally picked up, the silence in the house indicating she had warned the others to remain quiet. Sue, breathless, inquired, "Hey, Bobby, how's Albany?" The faint chuckles of the men in the room were audible. "You seem winded, are you okay?" I pretended concern in my voice. "Yes, had to hurry upstairs for my phone call," she replied swiftly, composing herself. "My client canceled, so I'll be home shortly." "Interested in dinner?" I asked calmly, though internally I felt more agitated than ever. "Heading home now?" she asked anxiously. "Sounds good. Just need to get ready, babe." "See you," she hurriedly replied before ending the call abruptly, leaving me with a knowing smile, aware of what was about to unfold in just a minute. As anticipated, 4 completely undressed individuals began descending the stairs into the living room. The men swiftly dressed, and Sue also hurriedly tidied herself. As they all rushed out, Sue slipped on shoes and a jacket, glancing outside, hoping they'd depart before she did. Had she been less excited, she might have noticed my car parked on the street. The men all started shouting at her simultaneously, prompting Sue to step onto the porch to listen. At that precise moment, I slammed the front door shut and locked it behind her. My wife caught a glimpse of my face as I closed the door, attempting to communicate through the side window with a pleading tone in her voice. The time for discussion was over. The other men returned to my porch, banging on the front door, indicating they wanted their belongings. Realizing their intentions, I dialed emergency, reporting an attempted break-in. The dispatcher informed me a neighbor had already called. Providing my name and address, I awaited police assistance, which arrived promptly just 2 minutes later. After the police interrogated my wife, I approached the 2 officers at the scene and informed them that my wife had been maltreated by the men present, demanding their arrest. This caused immediate reactions from the men, who began shouting that they were invited, and she consented, denying any maltreatment allegations. Everyone, including myself, turned to Sue, waiting for her response. She avoided eye contact and admitted in a subdued voice filled with shame that she had invited the men into the house, engaged in closeness activity with them, and wasn't maltreated. She acted of her own volition. The men seemed relieved to avoid maltreatment charges. Shortly after, 2 more police cars arrived, and they recorded everyone's names for their report. The senior officer then addressed me, suggesting that since my wife invited these men and they were all over 18 years old, there was little legal recourse. He recommended counseling or similar assistance, delivering the remark with disdainful glare towards my wife. I instructed the police to call a taxi and informed them that Mrs. Thomas would not be allowed back into the house. That evening, one of the men called a taxi after discovering their flat tires. They also attempted to accuse me of stealing their belongings, but I refuted their claims to the police. Turning, I walked back to the porch, where Sue remained with them until the taxi arrived. I stood on the porch, my eyes flashing with anger. Despite my fury, my wife bravely approached me. Unaware of my rage and the firearm on my person, she may have fled had she known. "Bobby, I'm deeply sorry," she attempted to speak, but I swiftly interrupted. "You've shattered my heart, and I'll never forgive you. Jeff called you a strumpet, and honestly, I think it's fitting. Henceforth, I'll refer to you as such and won't use your real name again. If you ever need to communicate with me, do so through Tad." With those final words, I retreated into the house, locking the door behind me, leaving her standing there. She hurried back to the group in tears, and Jeff moved to console her. She rebuffed his embrace, which oddly brought me some solace. However, my fleeting satisfaction soon waned. Upon returning to my bedroom, the scent of lovemaking pervaded the air, further incensing me. I erupted in fury, ransacking the entire room. Hauling the mattress, I hurled it onto the front lawn. Retrieving my toolbox from the garage, I disassembled the bed, tossing its pieces outside along with the mattress. Returning to the bedroom, I seized Sue's cell phone from the floor, scrolling through her contacts and messages. Predictably, I discovered repugnant emails, photos, and even videos of unfamiliar men engaging in carnal acts with her. Examining the images, it was evident she was acquainted with them. I chuckled bitterly at my former attentiveness to her, realizing those days were long gone. I carted all the boxes from our bedroom downstairs, depositing their contents in separate piles on the front lawn. Proceeding to purge her belongings from the guest room, I encountered an unexpected revelation. Moving each dresser drawer outside as I had done with the bedroom items, I encountered resistance with the last bottom drawer. Fueled by anger, I forcefully yanked it, hearing a telltale crack. With a bit of force, the drawer finally opened, revealing the source of the obstruction. 7 or 8 DVDs hidden beneath. I accidentally cracked one of the plastic cases, but fortunately, the drive remained intact. My heart sank once more as I examined the discs. I didn't think I could feel any worse, yet I did. Descending the stairs, I scrutinized the titles on the discs, which only intensified my distress. Arriving in the living room, I arranged everything on shelves for closer inspection. The first disc depicted Sue with her close friend Sarah at Sarah's residence. Sue often assisted at Sarah's gatherings in Avon, typically held on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It seemed they engaged in closeness activities with various individuals at her house. As I watched the footage over several hours, tears welled up, halting only at the sight of the final 2 discs. The first showcased Sue with her tennis instructor, a service I funded. She attended lessons every Saturday, returning too fatigued for closeness later in the evening, which now became clear. The second disc revealed Sue engaging in closeness encounters at her workplace, specifically in the boardroom with Jeff, her boss, and Jeff's superior, Bill Evans. Bill held considerable influence in the community, often featured in newspaper articles for his philanthropic efforts, which, I now witnessed, extended to my wife's private affairs. Retrieving a large envelope, I carefully placed inside it a cell phone, the discs, and a cassette tape I had recorded earlier. My intention was to hand the entire envelope over to my lawyer and confidant, Ted Worth, my trusted friend of many years. He was one of only 2 individuals in whom I truly confided. Nothing else mattered at that moment. Glancing at Sue's computer on the desk, I powered it up and began duplicating every file, email, photo, and video onto external drives. It took approximately an hour to complete the process, after which I settled down to sift through my wife's digital archives. Among the videos were scenes reminiscent of those found on the CDs I had discovered. Additionally, I stumbled upon explicit images typically associated with adult websites. Delving further, I uncovered a trove of emails spanning about 6 months. Despite her attempts to conceal them under misleading file names, I unearthed correspondence between her, Jeff, and several other men, as well as exchanges with Sarah. Just last week, I had dismissed them until one nearly devastated me. The thought of using my weapon crossed my mind, but I realized she wasn't worth it. I had to remain strong. The only email that affected me this deeply was from Sue to Sarah. Sarah questioned why she hadn't left me to be single again and asked Sue to detail her ideal future husband. Here's how she responded. "Sarah, I have no interest in him anymore. Bobby is faithful but foolish. I fear he'll soon uncover my secret lifestyle. He's not entirely clueless, but love blinds him. Lately, he's been gaining weight, and his expanding belly is off-putting. Comparing him to other men, he's lacking. I also detest beards and mustaches, which make him appear somewhat repulsive. I once loved him deeply, but the excitement of recent years is too enticing to give up. His lawyer best friend could pose problems if he gets involved. Jeff and Bill at work hint at promotions and perks with suggestive undertones. I laugh. I also desire a house and a car. If I play my cards right, I could also secure alimony each month. Additionally, I'm anticipating our Tuesday party, pending recovery from my tennis injury. Tony is impressive, Ensure I receive last Thursday's video. It was my first time with so many men simultaneously. As for my dream man, he must be affluent, loyal, compliant, and not too bright. He must cater to my every whim and still ask which one. I chuckle. I'm indifferent about the bedroom as long as there's money involved. I laugh. I can fulfill my needs elsewhere. Sometimes it feels too easy. Damn, Bobby's home now. Gotta go. See you on Tuesday. Call me Sue. I read this letter repeatedly, its words disgusting, and the last few years deeply hurting me. Did she truly feel this way about me? Was my love so blind that she cheated on me for over 2 years? Afterward, I retired to bed and fell asleep on the sofa. The next morning, plagued by restless sleep, I called in sick to work. I reached out to my close friend and lawyer, Ted Worth. Mary, Ted's secretary, answered the phone. I'd known her almost as long as Ted. I urgently requested a meeting, but she informed me he'd be tied up in court all day. Mary informed Ted that I need to meet him in his office in an hour. If he starts bothering you with nonsense, bring up Tammy Brown's name. That'll grab his attention. See you in an hour, I said before ending the call promptly. I began getting dressed when my phone rang. Reluctant to speak with Sue, I checked the caller ID. It was an unknown number, so I answered, suspecting it might be Ted returning my call. Hello, Mr. Thomas. This is Bill Evans from Susan's office. If possible, I'd like to discuss the events from last evening at your house. Could we meet today in my office to clarify the situation for all involved? Unsure if he was aware of the video footage of him with my wife at his workplace, I knew he was concerned about retaining Jeff Davis's key clients. My wife and Jeff were valuable assets to him, and he likely didn't want to lose them. Additionally, he was surely worried about negative publicity for his company and himself personally. Mr. Evans, I have an important meeting this morning, but I'll call you back on this number before noon to arrange something for today, I assured him calmly. I conveyed it as though he was reasoning with me. He was in for a surprise. As I stepped out, I glimpsed what resembled a bizarre yard sale. The broken bed and Sue's clothes were still strewn about. An elderly neighbor waved, wearing a curious expression. I knew I'd become the talk of the neighborhood. As they say in the news, it was a suburb sensation. In the city center, I grabbed a bite to eat before heading straight to Ted's office. Mary brewed a cup of coffee for me. Lots of cream, no sugar. We had a long history together. Holy crap, Bobby. I don't know what you've got on Tad, but I mentioned his name and he instructed me to clear his schedule for today. I could use a month off, she quipped. If you want to know who Tammy Brown is, she added jokingly, you'll have to ask Ted. By the way, where is he? I inquired. He said he'd be here right away. He needed to reschedule his meeting with the judge for today's court hearing, she informed me. Just then he walked in. Holy crap, Bobby. Tammy Brown. You must be in big trouble for mentioning that name to me. Come into the office and let's talk. Mary, don't patch me through to anyone right now, Tad quickly interjected. I grabbed my coffee and he shut the door for privacy. I recounted the events of the previous evening and shared what I had discovered about Sue's new lifestyle. Then, I handed him an envelope with the evidence I had gathered, and finally, he spoke. He listened attentively to my story without interruption. I could see the legal gears turning in his head as he processed the events from the night before. I also informed him about Bill Evans's request for a meeting today. Well, Bobby, as they say, let's prioritize. I've known you for a long time, and I understand you're devastated. Is there any chance for reconciliation with Sue? He inquired. Ted, if it were Katie, your wife, and you found those videos and emails, you'd leave her in an instant. I want a divorce, but I also want to inflict some serious damage. I'm not going to quietly accept this betrayal, I confessed. Okay, first, we'll sue Tony and the tennis club. Sarah is off the table as she's just a friend. Sue's workplace, however, is a different story. Secondly, we'll sue the 2 clients and their companies who were at your house. We'll also go after Jeff Davis, Bill Evans, and their associates. He warned that things might get worse before they get better, Ted cautioned me. But I don't care. Even if I have to resort to physical confrontation, I'm going to make these people pay for what they've done through Sue, I asserted with anger in my voice. All right, Bobby. Recap what Bill Evans wanted, and we'll proceed from there. Ted informed me that we explored several options, and I favored the final one. A direct attack on Sue's workplace seemed most fitting. I had leverage with video evidence of Davis, Evans, and Sue in their boardroom, Ted explained, noting that as Sue's superiors, they influenced her position. It could also result in serious legal repercussions. I liked the sound of it. Ted also hinted that once Bill Evans realized what evidence we had, his stance would change. likely resulting in a settlement offer. If it's less than $2 million, he can forget it, I remarked firmly. I'll tell you what, Ted, make it $2.5 million. I've seen your legal bills before, I joked. Come over tonight at 7 p.m. Katie will whip up a fantastic dinner for us. You could use a break from home, I insisted. I promptly scheduled an appointment with Bill Evans for 2 p.m. Following this, Mary peeked into the office. Ted, they're calling you online. 1, she informed him. Mary, I told you no calls, he snapped, visibly agitated. Sorry, Ted, but this is Susan. She wants to talk to you, and I thought you might want to answer, Mary persisted. Sorry, Mary, it's going to be a long day, and it's just getting started. Does she know Bobby is here? He inquired. Not that I know, Ted, she replied. Tell her I'll talk to her in a minute, he said more calmly as Mary promptly exited to the reception area. Well, I bet she's already discovered that her cell phone, computer, and all her DVDs are missing. I bet she was furious that I dumped all her belongings on the front lawn along with our bed, I informed him. Wow, you really had a busy evening. Let me handle this conversation and please refrain from intervening. As your lawyer, I need to clarify a few things right now, he indicated to me, connecting the call. I started to overhear a one-sided conversation, but I could almost discern what she was saying to Tad without hearing her words. Hi, Susan, this is Ted. Yes, I already spoke to him. Bobby is a stand-up guy and my friend. I thought you, of all people, would have his back instead of betraying him. No excuses, Sue. I'm not in the mood. Yes, I'll represent him. He has strong arguments. You know this won't be pleasant, right? I'll talk to him. But you've shattered a man who was always faithful and deeply loved you. I doubt he cares about your opinion. My advice is to get yourself a good lawyer. You'll need one. Yes, Bill Evans scheduled an appointment for 2 p.m., though I don't think you should attend. Listen to me, Sue. If you even attempt to eavesdrop outside the office door, I'll advise Bobby to leave, and things will escalate. It's better to wait and keep yourself composed today. I know he put your belongings out on the lawn, but just as you can invite strangers into your bedroom, he can remove your possessions from the house. Frankly, I'm surprised he didn't resort to violence last night. Yes, he was armed, but for self-defense purposes. Remember, he believed you were in danger of assault. It's in the police report. I can't say for certain, but if it were my Katie, I'd likely be in custody right now. I think he acted out of anger given the circumstances. Regarding your computer, cell phone, and any other missing items, you'll need to speak to the co-owner of the house. Perhaps he left them on the lawn along with your clothes, and someone took them. I've handled all the escrow paperwork for the house, and you both have equal rights. How you exercise these rights is up to each of you. Ted responded that he would inform him immediately and advised Sue sternly to remain where she was and let Bobby stay in the house until things were resolved, as it wasn't safe for her to be there with him at the moment. He then told Sue not to push it and expressed his temptation to punch her in the nose. He instructed her to stay with Sarah and promised to be in touch, asking her lawyer to contact him once they've retained one. Tears wouldn't sway Ted now, as he was not only Bobby's legal counsel, but also his friend. He stated that her tears wouldn't move him, and that he could be ruthless when necessary, which seemed to be one of those times. He expressed regret that she would witness a side of him only his enemies see, and warned her that she wouldn't like it. Ted concluded by instructing Sue to keep her distance from Bobby and remain in her office for the time being, as he wanted nothing to do with her. Glancing up at me, Ted asked if I caught most of that conversation, his tone tinged with sadness. I confessed to my friend that I did catch most of it, expressing my wish to confront her face to face and express my true feelings. However, I admitted that I didn't think I could bear the pain of seeing her again, at least not yet. I have a couple of requests for you, Bobby, he said, his demeanor shifting instantly to one of positivity and optimism. First, hand me those tapes. Tad indicated for me to retrieve the videotapes from the envelope, those from the previous night, the ones featuring Tony at the tennis club, and the footage of Sue with Mr. Davis and Mr. Evans in her office. After handing him the tapes, he instructed me to invite Mary to join me for lunch. I gave him a puzzled look, to which he promptly responded in kind. I think it's best if I review them myself to spare you any further distress before our meeting at 2 p.m. Moreover, I don't believe watching this material would benefit you right now. I don't want you to be upset before our meeting with Bill Evans. I acknowledged his wisdom and thanked him before sharing the good news with Mary. She jokingly suggested I take her to an upscale restaurant if Ted was footing the bill. We both chuckled and left the premises. Mary proved to be an excellent dining companion, and for the next hour she helped me forget my troubles. Upon our return, we heard Ted cheering as we entered the office. He was in high spirits, doing a little victory dance at his desk. "These recordings are a game changer, Bobby. I can't believe it," he exclaimed. My expression turned bittersweet, and I think he finally grasped why. "Oh, Bobby, I'm truly sorry I didn't acknowledge the significance of these videos. I know Sue's actions have deeply hurt you. I was just excited about what I uncovered." He apologized sincerely. "Bobby, come over here. I need your eyes on something." Ted beckoned me, and I complied, positioning myself behind him to view his screen. "Did you watch the entire video Tony shot at the tennis club with Sue?" he inquired. "No, I only managed to skim through some of it last night. It was tough to stomach without feeling the urge to lash out or worse," I admitted honestly. "Well, brace yourself. Towards the end, just after Tony and Sue finish, they attract a small crowd in the men's locker room. Yes, the tennis club's locker room. I hate to say it, but she let the other men who were watching join in after Tony. I'm not telling you this to upset you, but to shed light on this guy right here," Ted explained, pointing at the screen on his desk. The individual he was indicating was an older man DML treatmented in a towel. With his long gray hair and a walrus-like mustache, he asked if I recognized him. Ted hit play on the video, and I saw him discard the towel, revealing a substantial package any man would boast about. The issue was, he went straight to my wife and engaged in coition with her. The next moment, she was surrounded by 5 more men eagerly awaiting their turn, I recounted. "Ted, I have no clue who this guy is, but I presume you do," I responded, trying to maintain composure. "Bobby, this is ammunition for our meeting today at the tennis club at 16 Nasi, he informed me, his excitement palpable as he explained his strategy. I grinned when I heard his plan. Besides being my friend, Ted was an exceptional lawyer. I was relieved to have him on my side this time. We departed his office for downtown, armed with a portable DVD player, some printed photographs, and legal envelopes. Upon arrival at Sue's building, we proceeded to Bill Evans's office on the top floor, with Sue's office located 1 floor below. After waiting in the reception area, we were eventually ushered into Mr. Evans's lavishly furnished office. Just before entering, I sensed someone observing me from the hallway. I glanced in that direction and caught a glimpse of the woman before she vanished around the corner. Guess who? I thought to myself, relieved I wouldn't have to confront her today. We stepped into Bill's office, adorned with opulent furniture and adorned with plaques, awards, and photos of him with various notable figures. The thought crossed my mind. Had he ever brought Sue here? At that moment, my disdain for Mr. Evans intensified more than ever. I introduced Ted and took the lead in the conversation. "Hello, Mr. Evans. This is my friend Ted Worth, and he'll be joining us for the meeting you scheduled today," I informed Bill as we exchanged handshakes. "Mr. Thomas, Bob, I thought this was meant to be a private meeting between you and me," Mr. Evans inquired. "Well, I decided to bring Ted along. Anything you have to say to me, you can say to him as well," I stated firmly, without opening it up for discussion. He accepted Ted's presence and directed his remarks solely at me, disregarding Ted. This brought a smile to Ted's face. I anticipated what was coming next, but allowed Mr. Evans to speak first before we burst his bubble. "Bob, may I call you Bob?" Bill asked. Absolutely no issues. In fact, I thought it might be beneficial to have Jeff Davis present at this meeting too. "I'm not sure if it's feasible, but it concerns him as well," I informed Mr. Evans. After a brief pause, he pressed the intercom button. "Julie, inform Jeff that I require his presence in my office immediately. Tell him to drop everything and come here right away." "Understood. Jeff will be here shortly. In the meantime, I want to express my sincere apologies for the trouble caused by Jeff and Sue in your life. I know last night must have been awful, but if we collaborate, we might be able to find a solution beneficial to all parties," Bill expressed optimistically. "What exactly do you mean, Mr. Evans?" I inquired, waiting for Jeff's arrival. "I genuinely care for your wife, Sue," Bill began, but was interrupted by Jeff's entrance. He hesitated momentarily, appearing as though he might turn and leave, but Bill instructed him to take a seat. Reluctantly, Jeff complied, avoiding eye contact with me. "Bob, I wanted to convey that I have great affection for Sue. Almost like a daughter," he started to speak when Ted interjected. "Are you implying you have a penchant for incest, Mr. Evans?" Ted asked, catching him off guard. I chuckled to myself, understanding the intent behind Ted's remark. What are you suggesting? Do I have a fondness for incest? What on earth does that mean?" he retorted with indignation. "Well, allow me to illustrate. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, Ted stated, placing the DVD player on Bill's desk. "These are screenshots from the video you're about to watch." He handed them to Jeff, not Bill. Jeff's eyes widened, and he passed them slowly to Bill. The images depicted Bill and Jeff both involved with my wife, leaving no room for doubt about their identities or actions. I even suspected Bill recognized his own boardroom table where he and Sue had engaged in their activities. Jeff, are you seriously telling me that you were foolish enough to record this on video and distribute copies? Bill queried, nearly speechless. It was evident that Jeff was currently unable to provide a response and appeared completely dumbfounded. Well, Mr. Evans, here's how it's going to unfold. Oh, and just to clarify, I'm Bobby's attorney as well as his friend. So let me outline what we expect and how we expect you to address it, Tad informed the shocked audience, thoroughly relishing the moment. Firstly, Sue retains her position without question. Bobby believes she'll require employment, and she seems to fit in quite well with everyone here. He directed this statement to Bill, accompanied by a subtle wink. Secondly, Mr. Davis is no longer part of the equation here. Sue stays, and he exits, Tad declared to Bill, gesturing towards the flabbergasted Jeff. Thirdly, we expect you to present us with a monetary offer that respects our intelligence. We'll entertain your initial proposal and provide a yes or no response within 5 business days. We anticipate taking legal action within 2 months, possibly sooner if necessary. Before they could interject, Tad initiated the video playback, swiveling the screen for Bill's viewing. It depicted both men engaging in carnal acts with my wife repetitively in their boardroom. Jeff didn't need to watch, given his involvement in the video recording. Bill simply observed with his mouth agape. I could sense his mind working overtime, contemplating how to salvage his business, reputation, family life, and, most importantly, finances. I knew action would be imminent. Jeff, after these gentlemen depart today, we'll need to have a serious discussion about your future employment here. I'll consult with my legal counsel to negotiate a settlement that satisfies you to some extent. You both comprehend the potential repercussions for our business if this information were to surface prematurely, Bill mused aloud. Don't fret, Mr. Evans. We'll maintain your confidentiality until we receive a serious proposal from you. However, I wouldn't rush to terminate Mr. Davis's employment just yet. He may possess additional copies of the video, providing him with leverage. If we fail to act, you and Mr. Davis can address this matter independently. Oh, and just so you're aware, both of you could face legal consequences for engaging in relations with an employee, directly impacting your employment status and prospects, Tad cautioned them. As we both rose to depart, Tad reclaimed the DVD player and the photographs we had brought along. We exited just as Bill and Jeff seemed poised for a private discussion. I approached Tad with a query, but he gestured for silence until we were outside. I hadn't noticed my wife lurking around the corner, attempting to eavesdrop on our conversation, but Tad had. The last thing I heard was Mr. Evans barking into Julie's intercom. Get Sue Thomas here immediately. I grinned, anticipating an intriguing encounter. Bill would soon discover that I had discovered his DVD in our home. Once outside, I inquired why he had given Jeff an escape route by suggesting he use his own videotape against Bill. Divide and conquer, as they say, Ted explained. It's better if they don't act as a united front, but rather each for themselves. That way, if Bill makes a half-hearted offer to us, we can play them against each other. Tad also noted wisely that Jeff and Bill have families and attend church, despite their behavior depicted in the videotapes. They're not keen on rocking the familial boat at present. As I departed the building, I realized it would now be remembered as the site where my wife betrayed me, rather than the esteemed workplace she once inhabited. It saddened me to think about. Ted's words snapped me back to reality. All right, let's grab a beer before our next rendezvous at the tennis club at 4 p.m. We could both use a drink right now, and there's something I need to discuss with you, though I'm not quite sure how yet, Ted mentioned as we drove across town toward the tennis club. We stopped at a quaint bar restaurant adjacent to the tennis club. Ted ordered 2 beers and began speaking to me. Bobby, I believe Bill Evans will extend an offer, but likely for just under $1 million. I'm familiar with his legal team from another case, and they're quite adept. He's also a realist. I'll call him tomorrow and convey that a lowball offer won't bode well for his client's business or personal life. I'll propose around $3 million or suggest we abandon negotiations altogether, he disclosed. Furthermore, I need to ascertain if, in the event the offer is rejected, I have your authorization to cast Susan in an unfavorable light. I won't hold back for anything. My duty as your legal representative is to pursue what ensures victory in court, even if it entails painting an unflattering portrait of her. It might get ugly and highly publicized. I'll utilize every legal means at my disposal to secure our case. You might not appreciate all the potentially damning revelations about Sue, your marriage, and even your carnal life that could surface. I'm not sure if you've considered this aspect, Ted added at the 11th hour. I expressed that I had given serious consideration to the matter and believed I possessed more integrity than they gave me credit for. I mentioned that if necessary, I was willing to proceed, but I preferred to explore the financial offer route first, which I hinted at to Ted. Ted agreed and suggested starting by evaluating what Bill had to offer. He assured me that if Bill's offer was unsatisfactory, he would handle all the necessary paperwork promptly. Additionally, he mentioned leveraging his newspaper contacts and friends at 3 local news stations. He said they would be willing to obtain footage or images, even if they needed to censor the explicit content with blue bars, as they say in sitcoms. Ted, you've consistently been there for me, and I trust your judgment. I just wish this whole mess never happened. Being an oblivious husband was more enjoyable than being publicly humiliated by a cheating wife. Nevertheless, you have my authorization to take whatever actions are necessary. After all, I didn't initiate this debacle, but I'm determined to conclude it soon, I expressed with frustration in my voice. Understood, Bobby. No problem. Now, let's discuss the material for our next meeting. This guy, Mr. Harry Rydell, is the owner of the Ace Tennis Club. This is the guy I pointed out in the video in my office. He's indicated that he'll likely adopt a laissez-faire attitude, asserting that adults will be adults and he won't intervene. Even Tony's tennis coach might be dismissed for appearance's sake, only to be rehired later. Tony's quite popular at the club, particularly among female members. Keep in mind, Bobby, that while men primarily pay club dues, women are also stakeholders. This dynamic will be pivotal in your interaction with Mr. Rydell, he briefed me on the situation. We arrived just in time, and it was evident that Mr. Rydell and Thad didn't see eye to eye. Their animosity was palpable from the outset, Mr. Rydell told Thad bluntly, signaling the meeting's conclusion. Mr. Rydell, this is Bob Thomas, he said, nodding in my direction, and his wife is a member of your club. It has come to our attention that Tony Simba, your tennis instructor, was having an affair with Mr. Thomas's wife. We want to know what you plan to do about this, Tad finished. He waited for Rydell to speak, but even I knew that he would take everything upon himself, and in a few words, send Thad to hell. Listen, what 2 consenting adults do behind closed doors in their own time is none of my business, Harry Rydell informed us. And as for you, Mr. Thomas, if you can't satisfy your wife in the bedroom, don't come crying to me and blaming me if she strays. There are plenty of unhappy spouses who frequent the Ace Tennis Club. Some keep returning for the personalized attention my staff provides them, if you catch my drift, Harry said, winking at me. I felt the urge to lash out at him, but Ted restrained my wrist and quietly advised me to stay composed and follow his lead. You see, Harry, you're assuming this occurred outside the club without the owner's knowledge and consent. It's presumptuous of you to make such assumptions, Ted confronted him, pulling out a DVD player and placing it on his desk. Ted pressed play, directing the screen towards Harry. It was evident from his reaction that he didn't like what he saw in the video footage. Before Harry could respond, Thad interjected, Harry, you, with full awareness and with your colleague's complicity, took advantage of a paying member of your club. Mrs. Susan Thomas, a married woman whose dues were paid by Mr. Thomas, is now a dissatisfied customer, Thad informed the silent Mr. Rydell. When this information surfaces, every dues-paying man will want to know if his wife is engaging in similar activities while he foots the bill. I'll have to subpoena everyone present in the locker room that day. Married men may not be pleased with you about this, Ted added, adopting an almost storytelling tone. Furthermore, there's the issue of reasonable expectation of privacy when filming in the locker room. Harry, once I'm through with you, your club won't retain its community reputation, and your bank account may suffer as well, Ted asserted for added persuasion. So here's what we're after. A substantial offer from you and prompt action. Doing so could spare you considerable inconvenience and financial loss, Ted concluded, as we observed Harry Rydell weighing his options. Ted, you're still a real piece of work, but I can't argue with your reasoning. I'll contact you tomorrow with my offer. If I comply, all tapes will be returned to me and remain confidential. I'll also willingly terminate Tony's employment. Now, if that's all you legal extortionists came for, get the hell out. Harry Rydell dismissed us, as Ted retrieved the DVD player with a grin and powered it off. Oh, and say hi to Tito Martinez, Ted remarked to Harry before exiting the room. Go to hell, Worth, was all Harry could retort. Ted chuckled all the way back to the parking lot. That was quite the adventure. Now we wait for suggestions, Tad informed me as we headed to his house for a delightful homemade dinner. By week's end, Bill Evans had offered nearly $2.7 million to retain Sue as his employee. Jeff Davis, after naively handing over all his tapes to Bill Evans, found himself out of a job. Bill simply terminated him, leaving poor Jeff with little recourse. I went after the two fools who were with my wife the night I caught her with Jeff. They happened to be two of Jeff's major clients. Neither of them wanted any publicity, whether for their companies or themselves. So each of them offered me $1 million to keep quiet. Harry Rydell refused to make any offer and suggested we take legal action. So we did, and he ended up losing $3 million by the time we were done with him. His club suffered a mass exodus of members, and he was compelled to relinquish ownership. He likely thought he could evade consequences. But the judge wasn't impressed with the footage from the private locker rooms, nor with the infidelity. I granted Sue a house and a car as she desired, without having to pay a cent in child support. I only encountered her twice in court. Both times I greeted her as a strumpet, which brought her to tears. I often pondered why she cried now, but not before causing such turmoil in my life. I came into more money than I ever imagined thanks to following Ted's advice. The pain still lingered, haunting me to this day. All the trials of that dreadful year rushed back in an instant. I hadn't realized anyone was addressing me until I snapped out of my flashback and heard the restaurant manager inquiring if everything was all right. Unsure how long I had stood there lost in thought, I shook my head to clear it and returned to the present. Apologies, just reminiscing about an old issue once I saw the group I came to meet. Thanks again, I explained to the manager, noticing the curious glance he gave, reminiscent of how people regard an elderly person lost in reverie. I made a beeline for my ex-wife's table. The surprise was evident on her face. When last we were together, I was overweight, with long hair and a beard, nursing an old knee injury from baseball. That was my excuse then, but truthfully, I had settled into a complacent life with her. Now I sported a shorter haircut, was trim from regular workouts, and had my knee repaired thanks to the money from Jeff and Bill's company. My suits were now upscale, and I made an effort to present well in public. I opted to speak up first. "You look fantastic today, Strumpet. Almost forgot how stunning you could be," I remarked, intentionally provoking a reaction. I knew exactly how to push her buttons. "My name is Susan, Bobby. Why can't you address me by my name?" she retorted, clearly irritated. "I didn't label you Strumpet. You know who did? I simply find it fitting. I warned you 3 years ago that you shattered my heart, and I'll always remember you by that title," I explained, as the man beside her began to object and rise from his seat. But Sue urged him to remain calm. Tears welled up, smudging her makeup. Her boyfriend interjected, "Go freshen up, Sue, and fix your face. I'll handle this idiot for you." With those words, she stood, locking eyes with me as I reciprocated with a single glance, perhaps revealing the agony I'd harbored for 3 years. Her tears flowed harder, surprising me that she still harbored any sentiment toward me. Or perhaps it was lingering guilt, likely a blend of both. "I expect you to be gone when I return," she declared tearfully, heading to the restroom, where I noticed the sizable engagement ring on her finger as she wiped her eyes and left. "You must be Bob Thomas, Sue's ex-husband?" he queried with disdain in his tone. "Indeed, and you must be the new man she's been dreaming of," I retorted, sensing his indignation. "I'm Sue's CFO, and if I were you, I'd refrain from using that term," he cautioned, though his reluctance to cause a scene was evident. "I only sought to converse with you privately. I have 3 inquiries, then I'll vanish from your life forever," I informed him, noting his quizzical expression. "I've been in your shoes before, and I don't want anyone else to endure my fate. I suppose the Strumpet painted me as a lousy husband, abusive or neglectful, or a womanizer," I remarked, knowing precisely what she'd conveyed to him. "But I'm not here to salvage my reputation in your eyes. Honestly, I doubt it'd serve any purpose. First off, does Sarah still host her Avon gatherings at her place on Tuesdays and Thursdays?" I inquired. "Sue assists Sarah with her decor sales on Mondays and Wednesdays. It seems your memory's a bit faulty," he snapped back. "All right then. Does she still take tennis lessons on Saturdays?" I pressed. "Sue swings a racket on Sundays. You seem to have a hazy recollection for someone married to her for so long," he remarked triumphantly. "All right, final question. Have you ever checked under the bottom drawer of the dresser in your living room?" I asked hurriedly. "No, why would I even do that?" he protested. "The 3 questions I posed to you are the reasons why we're no longer together. I still have all the leftover divorce paperwork in my office. Legal documents, emails from Sarah and the other woman, and hours of videotapes. I've carried these with me for the past 3 years, so I thought you should have them, I explained, retrieving a worn and folded piece of paper from my wallet. This is what the other woman wrote to Sarah when she inquired about how to get rid of me before I discovered her infidelity. After reading that letter, I realized I didn't know her at all and probably still don't. But it all revolves around you, I stated, handing him the paper. However, I knew Sue very well and understood her compulsive habits. She always followed the same routine meticulously, sometimes driving me crazy. I also had a feeling that even with a new man, she'd stick to her old ways, I elaborated. He seemed hesitant to accept the paper, but curiosity seemed to win out. He reached over and opened the email. I've carried it for 3 years, occasionally rereading it and striving to better myself so that no woman would ever write such things about me again. Of all the evidence, that email hit me the hardest, which is why I've kept it with me. It's the same email I mentioned earlier in my story. Peter read the letter slowly and set it down on the table. Quickly, he grabbed a pen, scribbled a note on it, and to my surprise, abruptly left the restaurant. No glance back, no thanks, nothing. His expression remained impassive. I leaned over to see what he had written on the old email. I'll return home shortly. Please wait here and I'll call you in 15 minutes. I need to check under the bottom drawer of my living room dresser. Be right back, Peter. I sensed he'd seen the truth, even if he wasn't thrilled about it. Something told me I hit too close to home on all 3 matters. The email seemed to be the tipping point, and he needed to verify it himself. Leaving a note on Sue's table, I departed. There was no way I'd stay in that restaurant with anyone tonight. Back in the foyer, I phoned my client, who didn't mind rescheduling the meeting since they were running late anyway. Before leaving, I glanced once more at the table. Sue returned, searching for Peter. Sitting down, she noticed her old email and Peter's note below. Her face drained of color as she recognized the contents of her old email and Peter's message. The last time I saw my wife, she was sobbing so intensely that the entire restaurant turned to look. I felt a pang of pity, but at the same time I was indifferent. That was the final encounter with her. I still wonder if Peter found something under the dresser drawer. Sue's tears indicated he might have.